The rolling mountains and densely packed forests of southwest Montana are truly a place where a person could feel alone. Second only to the isolation I experienced in Alaska during my army days. Excluding Yellowstone and Big Sky, this region is sparsely populated, but in the best kind of way. I hadn't had a vacation in at least 3 years, a real one. I hadn't been counting the weekend trips to Spokane or Coeur d'Alene or Helena. The Montana Highway Patrol had stationed me in Missoula 3 years ago, right out of field training. I enjoyed Missoula. It kept me busy enough, but I was ready for a break. The schedules finally aligned and I had enough seniority to take off 14 straight days. During my time in Missoula, I had been able to explore Glacier National Park, as well as Flathead and Kootenai National Forest fairly well. So I set my sights on Yellowstone. I hadn't been back to the area since I was a kid, 10 years old or so, a family vacation or something. I didn't remember much of it. I had some campsites reserved inside the park itself, but also some in the surrounding Gallatin National Forest. I figured I would save some money on hotels and just tent instead, since I was saving up to buy a house. I packed up all my camping supplies into my truck, as well as my faithful canine companion Tango. Tango was a 3-year-old Siberian Husky, smart as a whip and with more energy than a nuclear reactor. He was a good companion and the best boy. After about a 6-hour drive, we arrived at the first campground near Earthquake Lake. I went to my reserved campsite and found that it was occupied. I went and talked with the elderly couple that were the hosts for the campground. They apologized profusely, as some glitch in their reservation system had double-booked the campsite, and I was just too late. There were no other sites in the campground available either. They offered me a full refund and a voucher for a free stay at another campground just down the road. They were positive this campground would be open and have sites for the next 3 nights. I thought it was a bit of a long shot since it was at peak tourist season. All the campsites were booked everywhere. I took the refund and the voucher, figuring I would at least check the place out before I drove to Big Sky to pay $300 per night for a hotel. Howling Woods Campground was the name. It was about a 10-minute drive from the previous site, nestled in dense lodgepole pines far off the main highway. The campground was quite beautiful. There was a small river along the southern end of the campground, with a sheer mountain face on the opposite bank. The forest around it was thick and hard to see through. The towering lodgepoles were packed together as densely as I had ever seen them. I had never heard of this place before. It hadn't come up in any of my searches when I was planning my trip months ago. As I was driving into the camp, I first noticed a permanently placed RV right at the center, sitting out front with a sign that read, "Welcome to Howling Woods. Please knock. Host always on duty." I got out of my truck and followed these sign's instructions. After hearing some shuffling, an extremely elderly woman opened the door. She had skin tanned by a lifetime of working in the sun, and her once jet black hair had more gray in it than black. She squinted at me through wary brown eyes and offered me a toothless smile. I explained my situation and showed her the voucher. "Oh, of course. Go ahead and pick out a spot and then come back and check in. I'll get some pamphlets for you." Her accent was Native American. I got back in my truck and found a decent spot. The site was clear and flat, with enough trees between the other sites that I could have some privacy. It was also close to the bathroom and the dumpster. A fire ring and a bear box sat in the middle of the small clearing, with a small picnic table just off center. The site was on the outer edge of the loop, so that the back of the site faced the open wilderness. I parked the truck and slapped on Tango's leash. We took a long, lazy walk back to the host while I scoped out the other campers. From what I could tell, the campground was about 3/4 full, an oddity for this time of year. The sites on both sides of me were occupied, one by a friendly middle-aged couple with Utah plates on their RV, and 3 Maltese ankle biters running circles around it. They waved at me and I chatted with them for a bit. They told me that this was their second honeymoon, after all 8 of their children had finally moved out. The other site was temporarily home to a couple of 20-something guys who didn't look up from their pipe when I passed them. The strong, skunky smell made me a bit sick as I passed. When I got back to the host, she had me fill out a simple sign-in sheet with my site number, name, and license plate. Then she handed me a small pamphlet about local hiking trails, a flyer about bear safety, and a small handwritten note. Intrigued, I opened up the note. In practiced cursive script, it said, "Campground rules. Please extinguish all fires at dusk. Do not leave your tent or camper after dark. If you must leave your tent or camper after dark, do not use any light source. Move quickly and quietly. If you are walking at night and hear something behind you, do not run. Do not look back. Just ignore it. Do not make any loud noises after dark. If you hear anything moving outside of your tent or your camper at night, do not look at it. Stay in your shelter. Howls, barks, grunts, and snorts are just local wildlife and nothing to worry about. Earplugs are provided by the host, free of charge. Do not leave any pets outside at night. Lock all doors on your vehicles and campers. Lock your tents if possible. Padlocks can be bought from the host. Do not leave the established trails or roads for any reason. Do not ever talk about what you see or hear in this campground." "Odd set of rules," I commented. She looked up at me, a flash of anger across her old brown eyes, her wrinkled brow furrowed. Faster than I thought possible, she lashed out and wrapped her bony fingers around my fist. "Follow them. They are important," was the only explanation that she offered. There was a seriousness in her eyes that I had never seen before in anyone. And then she released her vice grip on my wrist. "Okay, definitely. So, why is it called the Howling Woods? I've never heard of this place." "The wildlife in this forest makes a lot of noise at night. It is quite a spectacle, but it is very important never to interact with them. You'll scare them off. Or worse," she explained. I thanked her for her help and set off back to my campsite, shoving the papers in my back pocket. I returned to the campsite, pitched the tent, loaded all the food into the bear box, and started a small fire. I drank a couple of Budweisers and roasted some hot dogs over the open flames. I popped open a book and read a few chapters and drank a few more beers. Dusk snuck up on me pretty fast. I cleaned up the mess and took out my phone to check the weather. I had no cell service, but that certainly wasn't a surprise in this country. I took the beer cans to the nearest dumpster and did my best at the vault toilet. It was just getting dark as I got back to my tent. I chained up Tango while I got the tent ready, turning on my electric lantern. While I was laying out the sleeping bag, Tango barked. Tango, like most huskies, had a personality. He had quirks like a human does. He was a talker and would often howl and talk back to me in that strange husky noise. But he only ever barked when he was scared. I jumped almost through the top of the tent. I grabbed a can of bear spray and a flashlight from my nearby pack and tore out the front flap of the tent. Tango was cowering under the picnic table, visibly shaking. I had never seen this before. I shined the flashlight around the clearing and saw nothing. Beyond the cone of light, the woods were dark. The lodge poles scattered the beam, making it hard to see anything beyond the clearing. I coaxed him out from under the table and ushered him inside the tent. His tail was between his legs and he was shaking. A year ago, Tango and I were about 6 miles deep on a backcountry trail in the Kootenai National Forest. We turned a corner in the trail and came face to face with a grizzly. Tango nearly pulled me face first into the dirt in an attempt to run at the bear, utterly fearless and completely oblivious to the size of it. Seeing him react in such a way now made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But I forced myself to think nothing more of it though. I figured the bear had just caught him by surprise and had run off when it heard me coming. I turned off the lantern and settled into my sleeping bag, still a bit unnerved. However, the beers and exhaustion eventually aided sleep in coming fast enough. I wasn't sure how long I had been asleep. When Tango barked again, I sat straight up. Every hair on his body was pulled straight up and his eyes were transfixed on the front flap of the tent. Still, coming out of my deep sleep state, it took me a second to hear it. The sound of the front flap of the tent being unzipped. In the dark, I could barely make out the zipper moving slowly. Gun or bear spray, flashlight, the options raced through my groggy brain. I reached for my duffel bag and drew out my Glock 20 from its holster. I always kept it with me out in the wilderness as a last resort for bear defense. I flicked on the weapon-mounted light and shouted, "Stop what you're doing or you will be shot." The zipper stopped moving. I could just vaguely see the silhouette of what looked like a large person crouched on the opposite side of the flap. Tango began to growl this time, posturing for a fight. And then suddenly, the silhouette was gone. I could hear something large tear off into the distant brush behind the tent. I barreled out of the flap, gun in hand and Tango right on my heels. I shined the light around the clearing, again seeing nothing. Tango stood transfixed and staring at the certain point out in the dark woods. His hackles were still raised and a low growl emerged from his throat. What the heck? The chilly wind and frosty mountain air drove me back into the tent quickly. I set my gun back in the pack. My hands were shaking. What the heck was that? I asked Tango. He stared at me, his blue eyes offering no answers. The rest of the night, I laid in my sleeping bag. Sleep would not come to me this time, the adrenaline refusing to leave my system. And to make things worse, the howling had started. A chorus of bone-chilling howls arose through the night air. They didn't sound like wolf or coyote. I had never heard anything like it, and all the nights that I had spent in the mountains. It went on for hours, making sleep impossible. The howls started far off, but eventually, it sounded like these sources had moved into the campground. I could hear them coming from different directions, some close to my tent, some far away. One that sounded like it was right behind my tent, loud, almost ear-splitting, a ghostly, mournful howl. I gripped my pistol tight, waiting for something to happen, but then it just stopped. It all stopped. Eventually, the light of day began to show through the walls of the tent. I prodded Tango awake, telling him that if I was awake, he had to be too. I pulled on some warm clothes and exited the tent. Sitting at my picnic table was the elderly woman that hosted the campground. I jumped back, reaching towards my right hip for a gun that wasn't there out of reflex. In a calm, soft tone, she said, "You broke the rules." "What?" "You broke the rules. You had your dog out past dark. You used a lantern past dark. You were out of your tent past dark. You didn't lock your tent." "Yeah, so?" "Those rules are there for a reason, to keep you from attracting unwanted attention." Attention from what?" "The creatures of the woods. Something tried to open my tent. No animal can do that. Would you like to buy a padlock? I sighed. Yeah, sure. She reached into her purse and tossed one to me. $5. I fished through the tent until I found my wallet and handed over a $5 bill. Follow the rules, she stated one more time, befitting getting up and walking away. I stood there for a bit, pondering what the last 8 hours had entailed. Tango whined at his food bowl and snapped me back into the real world. I took out my griddle and made some eggs and bacon. Tango looked at his bowl of kibble and then at me with his sad eyes, and I broke down and scooped some of the eggs into his bowl. The marijuana enthusiasts at the next site over were talking about the howls one last night, stating that they were freaking sketchy, bro. I nodded in agreement to myself. I cleaned up camp and changed into some hiking clothes. I loaded up the dog and the day pack into the truck and went off to find some hiking trails. Exhausted, after a day of about 15 miles of hiking, I collapsed into my camp chair. I had about 2 hours before dusk. Rattled from the night's previous events, I figured I would strictly hold myself to the rules for the rest of my stay. I had considered leaving, but the campground was gorgeous and free. A hotel nearby would cost $600 or more for a 2-night stay. I figured if I followed the rules like the host said, I would be fine. Camp was cleaned and the tent was arranged long before the sunset. Tango and I were bedded down and comfy cozy when dark came. I looped the padlock through the holes in the zippers of the tent flap and I locked it. My Glock was set directly next to my sleeping bag, along with a spare mag. I read a few chapters in my book while Tango started snoozing. The howling started around 10 p.m. A cacophony of strange howls, almost moans. 12 full minutes of this. I almost enjoyed them, listening as they would get closer, hearing them move around the camp. Wolves or coyotes, I assumed. Nothing else could make a noise like that, and Tango didn't even seem to be perturbed by them tonight. Once they had stopped, I snuggled deeper into my bag, ready for sleep. A light rain came down, and I could hear it splatter off the rainfly on the tent. And then came the worst feeling that could possibly come. I gotta freaking go to the bathroom. I should have known better. I should have brought an empty bottle into the tent or something. I never thought of it. I looked at Tango, sprawled out and snoring. Am I really gonna do this? I asked Tango. He snored in response. I pulled on a hoodie and slipped on my slides. Pausing, I dig around for the list and I double check. No light, got it. The bathroom was 100 or so yards away if I walked the road. I figured that was the safer option without light. I contemplated taking my gun, but I had no way to carry it. The waistband of my sweatpants wouldn't keep it in place. I opted for the bear spray and I shoved it in my pocket. Tango didn't even wake up as I slipped out of the tent. I took the padlock off and then relocked the tent from the outside, making sure nothing would bother my buddy. I struggled with leaving him alone in the tent, but the rules said no pets out after dark. I made my way easily enough to the vault toilet and did my business. As I was leaving, the dew-covered dirt handle slipped, and the door loudly slammed shut. Crap, I whispered under my breath. I broke another rule. I started my walk back to the tent. I could hear something moving in the dense forest beside me. Ignore it. I kept walking. And then it stopped as soon as it had begun. Or at least, I thought it did. After a few steps, I noticed that I could hear soft footsteps behind me, but only when I stopped. My heart started pounding. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. A chill ran down my spine. Ignore it. It seemed like it was timing its own steps to match mine. It purposefully was making sure I didn't know it was there. It's stalking me. Ignore it. Follow the rules. Every fiber of my being told me to run. I knew that it wouldn't do me much good running these slides. I gripped the bear spray tight in my hand. Its steps were getting louder. It was gaining on me. I finally reached the tent. I knelt down to unlock the padlock, fumbling in the dark. I could feel it behind me. My hands were shaking. It was taking forever to enter the combination. It exhaled. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck. Ignore it. Finally, the lock popped open. I unzipped the flap just enough for me to squeeze in and shut it quickly behind me. I dove for the gun and quickly pointed it at where I thought it was, careful not to turn on the light. Silence. I reached forward and put the lock back in, struggling to do so with one hand, while the other hand held the gun out in front of me. The lock snapped shut. Silence. Movement. Walking. It was walking away, trudging through the undergrowth away from the tent. In the pitch black, I didn't see Tango walk up and lick my face. Good boy. Back to sleep. He obeyed, circling his spot 3 times and collapsing once more. I took a few minutes for the shaking to stop, and then a few more minutes for me to put the gun back down. Sleep came slowly, not fast enough. I could hear the door of the camper next door open. The Mormons. Well, I guess I assumed they were Mormons. They were letting their dogs out by the sound of it. Bad idea. The dogs yipped and yapped, even wandering over to my side. I could hear one panting and sniffing a few yards from my tent. The panting and sniffing became barking and growling, and the barking and growling turned to yelping and whimpering. Tango shot straight up, his eyes fixed at the point in the tent wall where the sound was coming from. I dived at him, wrapping my arms around his snout to keep him from making any noise. Shh, boy, be quiet. I could hear movement. The yelping dog was running around my campsite, through it. It was getting further away and now it was coming back, yelping all the way. And then there was a much larger rush of movement and the yelping stopped. The RV door opened and it sounded like the other 2 dogs scampered up the stairs. Lucy, Lucy, the man called. Bad idea number 2. A light slashed through my tent. He must have turned on a flashlight to look for the dog. I could hear him walk down the stairs and start trudging through the undergrowth. Number 3. Eric, come inside. Lucy will be fine. I'm sure she's just exploring. The female voice called out. His wife. Yeah. He trudged up these stairs and the door closed. I released my grip on Tango, and he licked my face again. I couldn't hear anything else moving around. Ignore it. I ignored what I just heard and tried to go back to sleep. It came easier than it should have, and the bliss of slumber washed over me. Morning came faster than it had any right to. I got dressed and took Tango outside. He did his business in the bushes and padded back over to me. I noticed a bit of red on his front right paw. Ah, bud, what happened there? I knelt down and examined his paw. I couldn't find any cuts or sores. And then I noticed he had something on his back paws too. And then it clicked. I stood up and walked over to the spot where Tango had done his business. It was about 10 yards behind my tent in the undergrowth. A smear of red covered the ground. Red and white fur. Red splattered painted the trunks of the lodge poles surrounding the area. Oh, Lucy. It was still early. The couple in the RV hadn't seemed to have woken up yet. Should I tell them? I would want to know, but the rules say not to talk about it. I decided against it. Whatever this place was, I was getting pretty freaked out by it. But just one more night. I hurried up and packed up my day pack. I bundled Tango into the truck and we took off for a good 14-mile trail that would keep us busy all day. After a day of beautiful mountain meadows, surreal river views, gorgeous lakes, and 14 miles of walking, Tango and I returned to the campsite. I packed up everything that we would need for the night into the truck. I noticed the RV in the next site. The couple with the 3 dogs, well, 2 dogs now I guess, were gone. No surprise there. However, the younger gentlemen on the other side of me were still there. Dinner was just a dehydrated hiking meal, since all the good food was packed up in the truck. I planned to get out of this place as quickly as I could in the morning. Sundown started coming and Tango and I got into the tent, locking it up behind us. I read a few chapters in my book until it was too dark to make out any of the words. Sleep came pretty easy tonight, but as is tradition, it didn't last very long. A twig snapping told me someone or something was stumbling around in the underbrush next to my tent. I checked my phone and it was around midnight. Not great, but at least I had slept through the howls tonight. I could make out a couple of voices, the young guys from next door. "Do you see anything?" one of them had whispered. "Nah, but it's definitely out there," the other said. My mind raced. These idiots were going to get themselves killed. I zipped open a small window on the side of my tent and I looked through the screen. They had flashlights out and were tromping around in the underbrush. They looked like they had their phones on in front of them, as if they were recording something, and then had stepped out of the woods into their light. Whether it was a man, beast, or a strange combination of both, it was terrifying. I had never felt such utter, visceral fear. 7 or 8 feet tall, burning red eyes and a body covered in patchy, greasy fur. Long claws and a protruding snout, fangs and slobber hanging off of it. They froze for a second, and then they ran, back to their tent, diving in. I reached over and grabbed my gun. I had to do something. But by the time that I was out of my tent, it had torn into theirs. Red and viscera flying as it tore into them. Furious. It was odd how silent the savagery was. I backed away, careful not to make any more noise. It got back in my tent and I locked it. What else could I have done? They were already gone. I pulled Tango close and kept a white-knuckle grip on my Glock. I could hear it now, slurping and smacking, like it was an 8-year-old having spaghetti at an Olive Garden. Follow the rules. I did my best to sleep that night. When I finally rose, I realized it was daytime, midday almost. I opened my tent to find a cop car blocking my truck in. A deputy sheriff was talking with another camper, pen and notebook in hand. When I glanced over at the next site, a group of people were loading a body bag into an ambulance. Scanning again, I noticed another deputy walking towards me, stern and grim look on his face. I flashed my badge and he seemed to relax a bit. "Hey, you hear anything last night?" Follow the rules. "No, why? What happened?" He gestured towards the body bags. "A couple of campers got ate by a bear, it looks like. You were 50 feet away and you didn't hear anything." "No, hard day of hiking and all. We were pretty tired and we slept heavy. Sorry." "No worries," he sighed. I gave him my name and contact info and he let me go. I packed up the tent as quickly as I could, and I squeezed my truck past the cop car. On my way out, I stopped at the host's site. I knocked. She answered. "What the heck is this place?" I blurted out. She smiled. "Someplace ancient, not meant for our kind, but yet here we are. I hope you enjoyed your stay." And then she shut the door in my face. I stared at the closed door. A tap from the window shocked me out of it. From the window of the camper, she mouthed the words, "Follow the rules," to me. And so I did, and I left. Tango and I had a wonderful vacation, but the mountains have never felt the same to me since. The feeling of being watched, being followed, it's always there now. I moved not long after to Salt Lake City. I rarely go camping anymore, though Tango and I love our day hikes. I follow the rules, still to this day, every time that I go camping. Surely, that's what she meant. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. I've always struggled with finding time to manage my finances. At the end of a busy week, the last thing that I want to do is spend time budgeting all of my expenses or tracking down customer service teams to cancel old subscriptions that I no longer use. But now I use Rocket Money and it does all of that for me. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control over my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. I love how the dashboard shows me this month's spending compared to last month, so that I can clearly see my spending habits. Plus, they help me create a custom budget and keep my spending on track. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things that you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. That's rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. You probably heard about 1,000 different versions of this story by now, and you probably raised a few eyebrows skeptically and questioned whether or not any of them are true. I won't bother trying to convince you otherwise. Nobody is convinced until they play the game. I certainly wasn't growing up. You see, my parents managed a hotel where throughout the years we heard hundreds, if not thousands of kids using the elevators to play the supposedly haunted ritual. In case you didn't know, according to the legend, if they pressed a certain number sequence in the elevator and also made sure that no one interrupted them, there was a chance that they could have an otherworldly encounter. All that wound up being for my father was an electrical headache. Since the hotel was old, a lot of times the elevator would shut down due to the kids mashing the buttons and constantly tromping in and out. There was even one time that a group of them got stuck, and he had to call the fire department to get them out. "What are they hoping to find?" I asked him. "People like the thrill of the unknown, Lindsay. They want to chase after a dream even when that dream can be a nightmare to others," he had said. That description fit my little brother Will to a T. Anytime he didn't have his nose stuck in a book, he was roaming the halls of the hotel, pretending to fight off monsters. For him, things like the elevator game weren't just fun though, it was serious business. Especially after his encounter with the tourist. I call the man that we met by that name simply because I never found out what the proper pronunciation of his real name was. All I remember distinctly about him is that he was tall and of Oriental descent, and he appeared to be around the same age as my father. The tourist arrived during a particularly slow season for us, where the majority of the time Dad was trying to catch up on invoices and refurbish the rooms, so he would let Will and I run the front counter. He brought with him only one item, a briefcase with the initials WR, which my brother found interesting because they had matched his own. "Are you a spy? Is that a bomb? Are you here to kill us?" Will had asked, bombarding the man with questions. "What brings you this way?" I asked, now wanting the man to grow irritated and take his business elsewhere. We needed the money after all. "Thanking you kindly. I am of request for one room singular for myself, to finish what started many years ago. The tourist said with broken English as he patted the briefcase softly. How many nights are you planning to stay? I asked, typing in the information that he provided. As many long it takes to finish the game, was his response. That made my brother's ears perk up. Game? Are you here for a competition or something? Will asked. This made the tourist smile and he patted the briefcase again. This have a set of secret hidden rules inside. For elevator game. Very important. Only way to win. Took long time to find. Now I can finish, he remarked. Wow, so you want to find a ghost? I could tell that Will was eating up every word the man said, but I had already written him off as a bit of a loony. Good luck, I told him, passing him a room key to a suite on the 10th floor, and watching him move to the elevator. He was also walking with a slight limp. Once he was gone, Will started to pester me with questions about the ritual. How was it played? Why did so many people try it? Was it real? It got to the point that I decided to get him out of my hair by attempting the game myself. If I show you that it doesn't work, will you stop bothering me? I asked him with a deep sigh. He nodded eagerly. I rolled my eyes and after checking to make sure Dad didn't have anything else for us to do, shooed him over toward the elevator. Once inside, for a minute he just stared at the buttons and I sighed. Do you even know the rules? Yeah, I think we start on the 2nd floor. He muttered as he reached out to press it. I snatched his hand away and rolled my eyes. It's the 4th floor and then we go down to the 2nd. The elevator doors closed and we began to ride up. When they opened on the 4th floor, I waited a minute for them to close and then pressed the 2nd floor. Then 6, then 2, then 10, then 5, then 1. You want to try? I asked him. He giggled excitedly and nervously and did as instructed. It took a grand total of 15 minutes or so to complete the ritual. Each time the elevator would slowly creak its way up or down the shaft and I held my breath expecting some kind of maintenance failure to occur. Instead, the most exciting thing was that it went to the 10th floor on its own, and Will clutched my leg, thinking that we would find a ghost. But the hallways were empty. See, I told you it's a waste of time, I said as I reached for the button to go back down. Wait, please wait, hold the elevator. Both of us looked toward the closing doors to see the tourist running down the hall towards us. Instinctively, I pressed the hold button, but it didn't work. Instead, they closed and we began to descend to the bottom floor. I think maybe we should go back up for him, Will asked. I remember the man's face more than anything. He seemed distressed, panicked, fearful. It was unnerving when I thought about it. I didn't like the idea of having to see him again, so I told Will dismissively that he would catch the next elevator. Can we play again? He asked nervously. It's late, bud. We should do homework, I said as an excuse. In reality, I was hoping that he would either forget about it or be too scared to try again. But I underestimated my brother, especially after what had happened with the tourist. It was Dad that made the discovery a few days later, when it was a little past time for our guest to check out. He was attempting to run the credit card information that the tourist had given us, only to find that it wasn't working. Cheapskates. I remember Dad muttering as he ordered us to go up to the tourist's room and demand an explanation. When we got there, the door to his room was already slightly ajar. I remember pushing it open and thinking that something smelled strange. Will and I took a step into the darkened room, flicking on the lights, and came face to face with a scene out of a horror movie. There was red everywhere. Trails of it stained the carpet and the walls where it seemed that the man had been using his bare nails to scratch in a sequence of numbers over and over and over again. In the center of the room was the tourist himself, his left hand cut off and his eyes wide, with the same expression of fear and panic that we had seen when he was dashing for the elevator door. And on the floor next to him, right before he died, he scrawled a most peculiar bloody message, one that still haunts me to this day. "Find me, change it." Will became visibly sick as he covered his mouth and went to the toilet to throw up, as I called downstairs to tell Dad what had happened. As I waited for Dad to arrive, curiosity got the best of me and I stepped over the tourist to peer at the note that was left. It looked like it had been written by the hand that was cut off, hasty and jagged letters covering the paper. There were lots of journals nearby and a small hand mirror, even a whistle like the kind you would use at a tournament. This is what the note said. "To whomever finds these hidden rules, please read them carefully as they are not the regular set of instructions associated with the ritual commonly known as the elevator game. You must enter the elevator on the first floor. This part remains the same. You must go to the 6th floor first, followed by the 2nd, the 4th, and the 3rd, and then return to 6. You must step out on the 6th floor with the mirror in your hand and keep the mirror facing the elevator at all times so that you can keep it within your line of vision. Walk in a straight line until you reach the end of the hallway. Walk backwards to the elevator using the mirror and go back inside. If the elevator door closes at any time during this part, you will have failed. Once inside the elevator, you will need to let it take you to the 2nd floor. Once you have made it to the 2nd floor, you will find yourself somewhere that you do not belong. If at any time the elevator stops on the 5th floor, remain on the elevator. There is sometimes a woman that will enter the elevator here and she will attempt to speak with you. Do not speak back. Do not acknowledge her. Use the whistle if necessary. Follow these hidden rules and you will reach the end of your journey." The handwriting was jagged and fast as though the writer had been in a hurry, and at the bottom a signature. It made my heart stop. William. Why was my brother's name on this note? Will stepped out of the bathroom, his face a mixture of sickness and confusion, and I crumpled up the note and stuck it in my back pocket. "What is all that?" he asked, wiping his mouth and seeing the journals lying in the bed. "Take this down to our room," I ordered him, shoving it in his arms. "Hurry, before Dad comes," I insisted. Ever the obedient little brother, he followed my instructions without even missing a beat. Over the next few hours, Dad called the police and they swept the room for any clues as to the cause of death. Dad told me that I could go down and get some food or something, but for the life of me, I felt frozen in place as the cops moved in and out of the room, carrying with them different little pieces of bloody bedding or carpet and evidence bags. All the while, my mind kept flashing back to the tourist's deranged and panicked expression from a few days ago when we had seen him rushing for the elevator. Was this my fault? Had I failed to save him? And perhaps, most importantly, did his death have anything to do with the strange ritual that he was obsessed with? With these distressing thoughts swirling around my head, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. The night after the tourist died, I pored through every single snippet of information that I could find on the game, searching for any reference to the hidden rules. I found nothing. In fact, I found less than nothing. Most of the stories were clearly hoaxes, written by internet users who wanted to get a quick scare for a few upvotes. Others were very detailed, almost realistic, but they always included some variation on the original sequence from the first website. That got me thinking through about how in those particular accounts, when a person would get the sequence wrong or do something different, something bizarre would happen. What if, I wondered, they weren't actually doing anything wrong at all, but by changing up the original rules, they were actually unlocking some hidden code? I decided if I was going to learn anything at all about that secret, I would need to see what was inside that briefcase. Shuffling out of my inflatable bed on the right side of her room, I moved over to Will and I shook him gently to wake up. "Sis, is everything okay?" he whispered. Dad was a light sleeper, and since we all had to share a room in the hotel, I gestured silently for him to follow me toward the door. "Get the journals and follow me downstairs," I said back. He nodded and climbed out of bed, his eyes wide with eager excitement. With the notes in hand, we snuck down to the main lobby and I grabbed us a couple of hot chocolates from the snack bar as we settled in the lounge. Will yawned and we placed the items carefully on the table. And then he picked up the mirror and waved it about for a second. "What do you suppose all this stuff is?" he asked. "Well, that's what we're here to find out." I told him as I took the rubber band off the bundle of journals and I opened up the first in the set. Much to my chagrin, I soon found that the notes were not taken in English, but rather Chinese. Amid those strange symbols were numbers and other doodles scribbled, almost aimlessly as though whoever had written this down had slowly lost their mind. Will was looking at the next journal, which seemed like a log of some sort. There were numbers listed 1 through 10 in different variations. Most of them were scratched through. "What is all this?" my brother asked. The edge in his voice told me that he was both excited and scared. I didn't want to admit that I was too. "It looks like they were attempting different sequences to the elevator buttons," I said as I skimmed through the journal. There had to be at least 100 different ways to press the buttons, and if the scratches and scribbles in the journal were to be believed, the tourist had tried every single combination there was. "Hey, look, it just stops here," Will said as he made it to the middle of the journal. It was a combination of 624368, and it occurred to me that it was almost the same sequence the note that I had found in the briefcase had. "Do you think maybe this is the right way to press them?" my brother asked. My stomach clenched. I hadn't expected him to catch that so quickly. I still didn't know exactly what the numbers meant or what would happen if a person did press them, but he was already eager to find out. He bounded from the lobby over to the elevator and pressed the button, shouting for me to join him. "Will, we should do this in the morning," I warned him. "Are you kidding? I didn't wake up in the dead of the night to look over a bunch of boring journals. Let's go on an adventure," he said excitedly. The door slid open and I desperately tried to think of another good excuse as to why we shouldn't do this. "If something goes wrong, we could both be stuck here all night and Dad would tan our hides," I told him angrily. "I think you're just a chicken," he said, jabbing me in the ribs. I sighed and got in the elevator, realizing that I definitely didn't want him doing this alone, and then I pressed for the 6th floor. "So we pressed the 2nd floor next, right?" Will asked. My heart was already racing, especially as we had passed the 5th floor. I remember the note's ominous warning. "Listen, Will, you have to promise me something," I said as the doors opened on the 6th and we looked out toward the empty halls. "Yeah?" he responded, quickly pressing button number 2. If we see someone, just don't say anything, don't acknowledge them, okay?" I told him. Sure," he said with a giggle. We arrived at floor number 2 without incident, but my nerves were on edge. "I'm serious, Will, we don't know why that man died. I don't want anything to happen to us," I said as I pressed for the 4th floor and added, "If nothing happens, you have to promise me that you'll forget about this stupid game. Deal?" The elevator shook. We went to floor 4 and then 3. Now it was time to return to 6, I thought. The elevator paused on floor 5. For a moment I held my breath. The doors opened, but there was no one there. "Isn't this the ghost floor, sis?" Will asked, just about to get off the elevator. "Are you stupid? Stay on here," I ordered him. He laughed again and the doors closed shut. "Jesus, you really are scared, aren't you?" he said as we arrived at the 6th floor for the 2nd time. The doors opened and I looked down the hallway. Nothing. It's just really late and I don't like this, I told him. He laughed and leaned against the elevator wall. I think I could do this 100 times if you always made that face, he chuckled. The elevator shook and shimmied and I sighed. Okay, game's over. Can we go to bed now? I asked. The doors opened again and he kept laughing, until I noticed that we were on the 7th floor, which was not the final destination in the sequence. I snatched him by the collar and held him back. Hold on, did you press for the 7th floor? I asked. Will stopped laughing and yanked his shirt away from my hand. I thought you did. What does it matter? Let's take the stairs up, he remarked. And that's when we heard the knocking. I looked up to see if maybe I was just sleepy, but Will had heard it too. There was nothing around though. What the heck is that? Will asked as we walked out on the 7th floor. I kept close to my little brother. Something about this felt very wrong. The hotel hallway was eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of the knocking. I'm sure it's someone playing a prank. We saw one of the guest doors slightly ajar, room 7K. As we passed it by, the knocking increased and Will got curious and pressed it open. I tried to stop him from stepping inside, but instead found myself following in after. Except the room was bare, and I don't mean just without occupants. There was no furniture either, and no windows. As we stood there for a moment in the dim lighting, both of us had heard the knocking again. It sounded like it came from the other side of the walls. Let's get back to our room, I said. Will nodded and we left the bizarre room immediately. As we left, we heard the noise intensify and become louder. It put me on edge. We raced up the stairs, scared out of our wits until we made it to our floor and I caught my breath. When we got back to our room, neither of us said a word. It was best not to, because I don't think either of us really knew what to say about that. The next few days passed by and I put the game in the tourist out of my mind. I kept the notes under my inflatable bed, perhaps as a memento of the experience. But I had no intention of trying anything connected to the game again. Will seemed to have moved on too, becoming wrapped up in school. But it didn't last. Not long anyway. It was sometime that same week when Dad needed a little help running the counter that we heard that same knocking again. I froze in place, trying to figure out if my mind was playing tricks on me. Dad showed up and said that somebody had checked out, but I was so focused on the knocking. Don't you hear that? I whispered. Well, don't just stand there, go and clean the room. Dad told us, ignoring me. We already knew what room it was going to be. 7K. Except this time when we entered, everything appeared normal. Furniture in place, windows where they should be. As I vacuumed and Will cleaned the bathroom though, there was tension in the air. An unspoken truth that neither of us wanted to confront. Something had happened while we had played the elevator game, and neither of us understood what. And then as we started to leave, Will came out of the bathroom and was crying softly, like the kind of tears you make when you're guilty of something. What's wrong? I asked. I didn't want to say anything because I knew you would be mad, he admitted. I sighed and muttered, Out with it, what is it? I've been playing the game every night ever since what happened, Will admitted. My eyes widened and I glared at him. I just wanted to know if it would happen again. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, he admitted. Why would you do that? I asked. He wiped his tears away. I don't know, I don't know what it was. But when we were here before, when things were different, I felt different too. I know you did too, because I can see it on your face. I need to know how we did that, he said. God, don't be an idiot. You could have gotten hurt or worse running around this hotel by yourself. I warned him. No, Lindsay, stop denying it. We experienced something that night, and I think it's the start of something bigger, he insisted. And then he took out a scrap of paper and muttered, I went through some of the other journals. They had logs in them too. Sometimes they weren't always scratched out. I think that the sequence we had is almost the correct one. And if we figure out what the right one is, then what? We can get scared again, meet a ghost. Grow up, Will, I argued. Stop trying to pretend that nothing happened. He shouted back and then added, I know it's real and I'm going to prove it. And then he ran into the elevator and pressed a button. Will, I chided him as I tried to follow after him, but it was too late. The doors were closing. I saw the bright buttons on the elevator telling me that he was descending to the first floor to start the game. Inwardly, my stomach was churning, hoping that this all was just an elaborate hoax still. I needed it to be okay. I needed what we experienced to make sense. The numbers flickered from 6 and then 2 and then 4, and then I saw it linger on 5 and my heart raced faster. Instantly, I pressed for the elevator to come to the 7th floor, but instead, the lights flickered for a moment and it jumped to the 8th. I didn't waste another moment. I was racing to the emergency stairs to make it and meet the elevator. I arrived just as the doors opened and my heart sank. It was empty. I must have spent at least a half an hour running from room to room, banging on doors and frantically calling out to my brother. And then eventually one of the guests had called downstairs and complained to Dad. His face was one of disappointment and confusion as I tried to explain what had happened. And then he called the police. No ghost got your brother, we probably just have a weirdo in the building. He growled bitterly. It took the cops less than an hour to show up. They got a warrant and started searching from top to bottom for any signs of Will. Dad told me to stay in the lobby or in our room. I knew that he was mad at me. I mean, why wouldn't he be? It was supposed to be my job to keep him safe, and yet instead I literally encouraged this fantasy, thinking that it would all make sense in the end. But now our whole world was falling apart. Nothing made sense, and Will was gone. A few days went by, and despite my father's efforts to keep up the search, the police labeled my brother as a missing person and forgot about him. I didn't blame them, of course. I knew that they were doing the best they could under the circumstances. They checked the security feeds. They made sure that not a single guest left the hotel within a 48-hour period. Every bag, every room, every nook and cranny had been explored. What else was there to do? I knew the answer, of course, even if I didn't want to say it. The hidden rules. They lingered in my mind throughout the entire ordeal. Somehow Will had been right and had managed to cross over to wherever, meaning the only way for me to find him would be to cross over too. It took me a whole day to work up the courage. I wanted to wait until Dad was sound asleep, and then, with the briefcase in tow, I started toward the elevator. This time I resolved that I was going to follow the note explicitly. I pressed the button and took a few calming breaths, trying to convince myself this harebrained scheme was going to work. As the elevator rode down to the first floor, I placed the briefcase down and reviewed the note again. 62436. And then the elevator would take me to the second floor as my final destination. I paced the lobby for a moment, my palms sweaty. I knew that it was not a hoax anymore. I knew what I was walking into, but my brother needed me. So I stepped inside and I pressed the first button. Slowly, the elevator doors creaked close. The next few moments were tense. I thought that I could hear my heart beating faster as we had reached floor 4 and then 5 and finally 6. As the doors opened, my face felt flushed and I was sweaty, but I had to keep going. I pressed down for the second floor and then the 4th and then the 3rd. Nothing had happened so far, and maybe nothing would. I had almost convinced myself that Will's disappearance was still in the realm of factual evidence when the elevator began to move itself toward the 5th floor on its own. I tensed up, recalling the warning about the mysterious woman the note said to never interact with. As the doors opened, I expected the worst, but I was only greeted with that same eerie quiet. The doors lingered open for a second and I reached down to open the briefcase. I was almost there. Now I needed to follow the strange ritual with the mirror. I pressed the 6th floor and waited as the elevator shimmied up. I took a few slow, steady breaths and then stepped out to the hall on floor 6. The elevator doors stayed open. I took the mirror in my hand and slowly raised it to my eye level, just enough where I could see the empty box. And that was when I saw her. She was standing there in the reflection of the mirror, just standing and waiting in the elevator, without so much as a flinching motion. She wore this long white nightgown that went to her ankles and had dark matted hair covering her eyes and pale face. But there was no doubt in my mind. This surely had to be the woman that I had been warned about. I took a few steady breaths again, my heart pounding even louder as I walked slowly down the hall with the mirror facing the elevator. The woman didn't move. It was like she was waiting for me to return. Finally, I reached the end of the hall, my palms sweaty as I struggled to not look at even her reflection. And then I began to walk backward. Why was she just waiting? What did she want? I couldn't hear anything in those halls, not even my own footsteps. The air felt tense. I was almost there. She still hadn't moved at all. Was she smiling now? Out of the corner of my eye, it seemed like she was, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't want to risk even bringing my eyes close to hers. I didn't know what this woman was capable of. All I knew was that she was dangerous and she was evil. Finally, I made it to the elevator. I kept the mirror near to my eyes where I could see that she was standing just behind me at neck level. It was a smirk, I was sure of it. I lowered the mirror down, thinking that maybe this was just a trick of the light. Maybe without the mirror I would return to the normal world. So I tentatively reached my hand forward to press the next button. And then her pale fingers moved past mine in a flash and the woman pressed it for me. Our skin nearly touched and I instantly looked toward the floor, not daring to make a move. The elevator shimmied again as we rode down to floor 5 and the doors opened once more. I got the sense she wanted to leave the elevator, so I scooted to the left and kept my eyes down, watching her bare feet shuffle out of the box. And then at last, she was gone. The doors closed and I drew a sigh of relief and I pushed for the 2nd floor. Finally, this ordeal was over, I thought. But I was only getting ahead of myself sadly, for as the doors opened to the 2nd floor, I found myself immediately off-put by the way the floor was set up. There were no doors, you see, not like the regular setup where they were all in a row. Instead, it was just a blank wall with no indication of any guest rooms at all. I considered waiting and riding back to the 1st floor, but Will was somewhere amid this maze, I had realized, so I stepped out and began to explore. The carpet made no sound as I walked and explored the long hall, my eyes always turning back to make sure the elevator was still there. But nothing else ever was. There wasn't even any indication as to where the illumination was coming from. It was just this sort of artificial glow that seemed to emanate, no matter how far down the hall I went. And then I stopped and looked down toward the end of the hall, then turned around and looked back at the elevator. I was squarely in the middle of the hall. No matter how many steps forward that I took, nor however many back, it was an endless hallway. And then I heard a door open behind me. "Will?" I whispered, turning toward the elevator. But now it too was gone in this nightmare. Instead, only the walls remained, and a singular guest room. 7K. Again? How could that be if I was on the 2nd floor? I wondered as I went up to it and knocked softly. It seemed to be the only thing to do. And then it opened and I found myself staring at a man that reminded me of the 1930s detective comics, with the fedora and a long trench coat. He was tall, a bit foreboding, but he didn't even so much as make a move toward me as I stood at his doorway, so I figured I should be the first one to talk. "Hello, my name is... It no longer matters," he told me softly as he finally opened the door wider and let me inside. I shuffled in, curious to see how he had set up room 7K. It was no longer empty like when Will and I had visited. Instead, the detective had layers and layers of diagrams, photographs, and notes pinned on the walls. There didn't seem to be a bit of empty space anywhere, except in one singular part of the wall where he had used his fingernails to scratch out a message. "Who is woman?" It read as I sat down on one of the chairs and he went to get coffee, my eyes wandering his messy research. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "That doesn't matter either. What matters is where I'm going next," the detective replied. "And where might that be?" I asked. He returned a moment later with coffee and smiled at me, his gestures and features a bit more shaky now. Was he the one nervous? He looked familiar as I caught his eye and I saw a briefcase next to him on the floor. Was that the same one from the tourist? The one that once had journals in it? "This belongs to someone. You have to return it to them and don't take the journals if you want to see your brother again," he said, passing it to me. "How do you know about that, and how do I find somebody who's already dead? I have that same briefcase. It's what led me here with notes from my brother," I said in confusion. "Time works differently when you're inside the game. We no longer exist and yet we cannot leave this place. I am bound to this place now that we have met," the detective answered before I could even get my next words out. I looked toward his walls of evidence. "You came here to find something, didn't you?" I asked. All of this felt foreboding, an inevitable destiny that I couldn't escape. His eye twitched. I stood up and examined the photographs. Some of them were just of empty hallways. Others were of the woman at a distance, never in full view, always blurry. Some of them were of me. And then there were news articles of buildings across the world, similar to the ones that I had seen online of different variations of the elevator game. But these were far older, all the way back to before World War I. And in some of those same photos, I saw my brother, trapped in the past, chasing for an exit. But instead, you became trapped, a prisoner to this place, I realized as I returned to the mess in his room. "We're all prisoners here, even her," he said with a whisper as he looked toward the wall where he had scrawled his question. "Do you think you will ever know the answers?" I asked. "I think I have them all, but you won't like it," the detective told me. And then he pulled his coat a smidge and showed me a loaded revolver in his belt holster. My eyes grew big as he unhooked it and cocked the weapon, the barrel of the gun pointed straight at my head. He twisted it upward toward his temple and pulled the trigger, blasting his brains out as I watched in numb horror. His body fell to the floor as a limp doll. I darted the room, too frightened to stay another moment. To my relief, the elevator had returned. I took the briefcase and I didn't look back until I made it to the lobby, back to my own world. I didn't stop until I got back to our room and hid the briefcase under my bed again. I was expecting to see the other one where I had left it, but it was gone. Or it had never been there, I wasn't sure. My father came in to check on me. He had a worried look, probably hadn't gotten any sleep at all since my brother had disappeared, and he asked if I was feeling up to doing a little housekeeping. I told him yes, anything to get my mind off of what had happened to Will. He sent me up to the 7th floor again to shampoo the carpets in the room. I almost dreaded going back to that cursed room. But eventually, my sense of well-being and calm had returned. I was safe now in this world. Still, the directions the detective gave me were clear, and I knew that it would be impossible for me to ignore forever, I thought as I brought the briefcase to the room. I had to obey the secret's rules if I wanted to find Will, especially when I found something stashed in the vent in that suite. The screws had been loosened ever so slightly, and it seemed as though it had happened recently. Reaching inside, I found a small paper bag. Inside was a .42 revolver. It had the distinct smell of having been discharged recently. How was this world connected to the one that I had been lost in? I put the briefcase on the bed and looked at the gun a little bit closer. It had Will's initials on it, just like I expected. And then I heard a noise, something from the hall. I turned and looked up to see a familiar face. The tourist. He was alive and he looked like he had come to this room searching for someone. When he saw me, his eyes got big and he grabbed the briefcase and ran. Instinct took over me and I dashed after him. I think I ran harder than I ever have in my entire life. The way that his eyes danced and lit up when he saw, it told me that he knew something. He had answers about Will. So despite the fact that I could only faintly hear his footsteps, I was hauling. I turned the corner and saw him. He paused for a moment to try and consider his next move, and I used that moment to rush toward him. He turned toward me, shocked to see that I was still in pursuit, and started to run again, but it was too late. I tackled him down, my arms intertwining around his chest and fumbling to the carpeted floor. The briefcase went flying. We tumbled and tossed for a few moments as we fell, his right hand reaching for something in his pocket. I got to it first. It was a switchblade. For some reason, I felt a rush of frustration and anger take over me, and I held it next to his skin. "Stop, just stop. I don't want to hurt you," I ordered. Thankfully, he obeyed. He froze and reached his hand toward my face before asking, Why you follow me to the grave?" I pushed myself off of him and muttered, "I came to find my brother, and I knew that you would have answers. What do you mean by that?" He got into a crouched position, wiping the sweat from his brow and muttering, "You're not supposed to be here. Unlucky. I don't give a crap about your stupid ritual. Now, you're going to come with me and we're going to find him together. Translate your journals and maybe piece together what I need to do next," I told him, waving the switchblade back and forth. "No, I cannot leave," he insisted, and it looked like he was going to run again, so I quickly sidestepped and twisted his arm, putting the blade against his back. "Look, I know this is important to you, and you can get right back to your stupid game once you help me find Will," I snapped and added, "Don't make me do this. Please, I just want answers." He hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded reluctantly as we moved toward the elevator. I picked up the briefcase and took it with us and asked where we were supposed to take it. "I do not know. The game is never played out this way," he admitted. Once the elevator door was closed, I slumped to the floor of the box in relief and started to breathe in and out rapidly. That run had taken the last of my energy. "This isn't going to go way you plan," the tourist warned me. I was about to ask him what he meant by that when suddenly the elevator shook, and then it stopped altogether. We were in between floors 2 and 3. It was stuck, just like I had feared. The lights flickered and I heard the tourist begin to chant and pray. "Get a hold of yourself, we're going to get out of here," I told him, making him look me in the eye. He said nothing and just looked at the ground. His lips were trembling. And then the lights flickered again and I saw out of the corner of my eye what was troubling my passenger. We were no longer alone in the elevator. She had returned. As soon as I saw her pale legs and bare feet, it was like pin needles were being stuck against my skin. I was hardly able to move and I wanted to hyperventilate. And the man that was there alongside, a man that I had seen dead only days before, was not offering anything substantial to make the situation better. His eyes were glued shut and he was chanting. We needed the prayers, that's for sure. Because this was definitely something that I couldn't figure out what to do. The woman just stood there and barely out of my line of vision. I knew that her eyes were on me even if I didn't look. She was waiting for us to acknowledge her. And that terrified me. I was sure at any moment that she would make a move and reach out and touch me, and it only made me want to vomit. Why was I acting like this? I had nothing to connect her to being dangerous, other than the words on a stray note. Yet I knew it as soon as I saw a glimpse of her, that she was deadly and powerful. So instead, I focused on what I could do. I whispered to the tourist to try and draw him out. How long have you played this game? I asked quietly. I knew, of course, that she could hear us, but I figured a distraction might make things easier. After all, we had been there 2 hours stuck and I already knew my cell phone wasn't working. We were trapped until we figured out what she wanted. It was just another part of the game, I told myself. I had to keep telling myself also that it was a game that could be won. After what I had seen happen to both the tourist and the detective, I wasn't so sure. Years, the tourist finally said after what had been the longest pause. Why? What's the point? What are you after? I asked, scooting closer. Difficult to explain in mere words. There is more to it than just an end goal. It is an experience that cannot be rationalized. You have felt this too. This is why you are here. The tourist explained. I couldn't deny that. More than anything though, I wanted to find Will and get him back to our side. But now that I think on it, I have grown to understand a little about what the tourist means. It's enticing. These kinds of secrets. You think you understand the world and how things work, and then you see or feel something that doesn't fit. Like a woman standing in an elevator. Just standing and waiting for you to open up to whatever is beyond your reach. That sort of beyond is downright terrifying if I'm being honest, because it can't be sorted out. It's an infinite unknown, and it's like a black hole, drawing everything and everyone into its hungry maw. We are going to get out of here, I told him. The tourist didn't seem so sure. It's not possible. Told you already, it won't let me leave. And this is karma, bad karma for even attempting it. He said, shaking his head vehemently. We can do it if we work together, I told him and pointed slowly toward the roof of the elevator. There was a case of some kids that got trapped in here a few years back. Dad had to climb down the rope and haul them out. I saw him do it too, and I know there's an emergency release button for the doors on every floor. I told him gently. You think escape that easy? He laughed as he pulled his legs up to his shoulders and crouched in fear. He was paralyzed with indecision, convinced that his fate was already decided. Maybe he wasn't wrong. I had to see him die. Could something like that be erased? I had to try. I stood up, focusing on the latch overhead. It wasn't very big. We would have to slip through one at a time. You're going first, and then you help me and pull me up. He continued to shake his head no, and I sighed, realizing that he needed some kind of convincing, and sadly the only thing that I could threaten him with was only mere feet away. Listen to me, if you don't do this, I'll make sure that you talk to this thing and get stuck here forever. You hear me? I snapped. The tourist stopped shaking and thought about my warning, and then he got up and nodded vaguely, keeping his eyes on the floor. I will help. You will not believe until you see for yourself, he remarked. I didn't have time to ask what he meant by that, so I cupped my hands and gestured toward the ceiling. I'll boost you up, I told him. Just as he was getting ready to lift up, I felt the girl move closer toward me. Was she alarmed by the fact that we were leaving? I could feel her breath on my neck. Let's go, I urged the man. He used his nimble fingers to push the latch open and then carefully slid it open, giving us a view of the long, endless chasm that stretched down above. It seemed to go for miles. He tossed the case up first. I wobbled a bit and pushed him up, encouraging him to climb. I felt a cold hand against my shoulder. She whispered in my ear, "Don't go." It felt so terrifying. Such a simple phrase. I wanted to respond. It took all of my willpower not to. "Help," I urged the tourist. For a sharp moment, I thought that he was going to leave me there, with her. And then he returned in the crawl space a moment later and extended his hand. I grabbed a hold of it and he started to lift. Surprisingly, for a man of his size, he was able to haul me up with ease. Once on the roof of the elevator, I gestured above to the dim light that was pouring into the shaft from the doors above. "There's our way out." Below us, the girl began to scream. The tourist clenched his fingers against the side of the elevator and muttered, "There is no way out of here." "Enough of that," I shouted as I reached in my pockets. The whistle that might be the only item that I hadn't used. I blew hard on it. The elevator shook and I grabbed the cables and told the man to do the same. Will needed me. I blew on the whistle again once we were against the rope and we had a firm hold on it. And then below us, the elevator dropped and I heard her screams reverberate throughout the elevator shaft, and it seemed to grow louder the further that it fell. "There's the emergency switch. Press it," I told him, gesturing toward the left side of the door. The old door slid open slowly and I saw the familiar drab carpets. Just as they had finished opening, the elevator began to move and come towards us. "She wants us to stay with her forever," the tourist squealed as he clutched the briefcase. "Move it," I told him. We scrambled to get into the third-floor hallway. It was mere seconds before the elevator rolled up to meet us. I collapsed on the carpet and felt certain that the doors would open and the ghost would come attack. Yet instead, as they did stop, I was shocked to find the box now empty. She had vanished. "This is where we die," he muttered. My heart finally stopped, beating like a drum as I looked about the empty corridor. "I don't really care where we are. You need to tell me how we return this thing so we can get my brother back," I said, gesturing to the suitcase. "Won't be possible," he insisted. I sighed, ignoring his banter for a moment as I searched for the stairs. A few minutes later, I realized that I couldn't find them. Then when I returned to the hallway, I found that the tourist was missing, and one of the doors was ajar. "I leave for 5 seconds and you're trying to run," I muttered as I entered the room. And then I froze as I realized why it looked familiar. It was the same room that Will and I had found him in that first night, dead. The tourist was sitting on the edge of the second bed, clutching his briefcase and nervously fidgeting as I entered. He looked toward me and slightly a bit. "I told you not to come. Would be bad. Now bad will befall me. I went against it. Now I am part of it." His English was even more broken than normal. He sounded extremely distressed. "Part of the game? How is that possible?" I asked him. He unlocked the briefcase and took out the notebooks where he had scribbled probably 1,000 times before. "The one who seeks all will come to finish my game. I cannot leave room. You must go in my place," he told me. "What do you mean you can't finish? The words didn't even leave my mouth. I turned toward the door only to find it was gone entirely. The room was making sure his destiny came true. "I have become part of the game, but you don't have to," he said. When I turned back to him, it seemed like the man was talking clearer than he ever had. "I think it wanted you to see the consequences, though, of what happens when you defy it," he told me anxiously. There was a knock on the wall where the door should be. "Hide in the bathroom, please. You must hide to live, to finish the game and find your brother," he insisted. I heard the knock again, and it was loud. How did it expect to enter the room without any doors? I hurried to the bathroom and closed the door almost all the way, letting it peek just a tad to see what would happen. I wish I hadn't. The knock came again and the tourist cleared his throat. I am ready. Come. Something in the wall moved. It formed an outline right where the door should have been and took the shape of a body. It was tall but had no head to call its own. The clothes that it wore resembled something a traditional bellboy might wear, and in its hand was a long razor sickle, glistening in the dim light. The headless apparition moved toward the tourist, and I watched in bewilderment as the man offered his left arm out to the beast. Without a word, it sliced apart his appendage. The briefcase fell from his severed hand and the creature retrieved it. Then just as quickly, the creature slipped back into the walls. I rushed out to him and saw that he was covered in his own blood. He was crying and shaking in shock. I couldn't tell if they were tears of joy or hopelessness. The way will be clear to you. I understand it all at last. Thank you. I am free, he said as his lips trembled and he fell to the floor. I looked over to the wall and saw the door had magically reappeared, and for a brief moment, I glanced back at the tourist. His severed hand was moving with a mind of its own, scrawling those mysterious numbers on the carpet and walls in blood as the door hung open, the game urging me to continue. I didn't look back toward the lifeless eyes of the tourist this time. I had seen that before. Now the future was unfurling before me and it was limitless. I felt like maybe I did have a chance to find Will. I returned to the hall trying to find another clue. I stumbled backward and saw that the elevator was gone, my ticket back to normalcy. I looked about the hallway wondering what ghost would come up next. And then I heard it behind me, that same knocking. I zipped through the halls until I could find the stairs. Thank God they finally showed themselves, and I didn't stop until they had made it to the 6th floor. Finally too exhausted to keep going, I collapsed near a window. The hazy red sky beyond my hotel told me that I was still trapped in the game. As I slammed my fist against the glass, I began to cry, wishing this stupid game would end. I had seen death several times and been haunted by monsters beyond imagination. I just wanted to find Will, and so far, all I had done was return the briefcase to a ghastly monster. Now, with nothing to tell me where to go next, I felt that I was at the end of my rope. And then I felt a hand touch my shoulder and I nearly jumped and screamed. It was the detective, except he didn't look as old as he had before. His face was clean-shaven, and at last I realized why I knew his eyes. Will, it's you. Oh my God, I said, holding back another scream. I hugged him as tight as I could, not wanting that moment to end. But as we pulled away from each other, I realized his eyes were tainted with sadness. How long have you been here? I asked him. It doesn't matter. You managed to return the rules to the game. That means that I can finally go home, he said with a smile. But I saw you die. I saw you trapped here, I said. Another time in another place, another game. But rules are made to be broken even if you don't understand the consequences, he said as he passed me something. It looked like the mirror that I used to protect myself when first arriving at this strange place. Watch me leave through this mirror and I can go back to being young. Wait, what? What do you mean? What consequences? I asked. I can return, but you have to stay now. You are now a part of this, and that's how it works. The game always wins, he told me. You have become the ghost. I looked down at my skin and saw that I had been running so long that I was barefoot. My skin lacked color from lack of sun. I probably looked disheveled and defeated, and I realized why the woman from the elevator had frightened me so much. She was me. Behind us, I saw the elevator was materializing, and the knocking had returned. The creature was hunting Will, determined to make sure that he couldn't leave. I'm sorry, Lindsay. I'm sorry I did this to you. I promise that I'll try to find a way to get you out of here, he said with tears in his eyes as he told me to hold the mirror up. No, you can't. Take care of Dad, that's your job now. You must promise me that you will make sure that he's okay," I said as I tried to not cry. My aged brother knew that my father would likely never understand what happened, but no further words were spoken between us. He mouthed another apology as the elevator opened. I saw in the reflection of the mirror that he suddenly reverted to being young again, and then the doors closed and I was alone. The knocking got closer, it overwhelmed me. I recalled what the tourist had said. "I'm ready, come on," I said. And then the headless creature appeared from out of the wall, holding the briefcase and offering it to me. I took it and went to the room where this all began, and sat down and looked at the drab walls and the endless abyss that I was trapped in. Tears in my eyes as I realized that now I was going to be here for God knows how long, waiting for the cycle to repeat. I read the notes, now no longer in Chinese but my own tongue, written by my hand. "The tourist will come again and steal this from me," I thought as my fingers tapped against the suitcase. "But this time, I must make sure he doesn't leave here with the hidden rules. The elevator game will live on, but the hidden rules must never be found." I was wrong to think they revealed the truth. No, they only make you a part of this sick and twisted nightmare. You know this story by now. It's been common in the past year. The pandemic ravaged economies worldwide. Small businesses went bankrupt in droves because of lockdowns. And I'm one of the unlucky ones that found themselves without a paycheck for next month's rent. There's not much to say about myself. I'm an average guy. Average height, weight, and build. Average low-income job. Average crappy apartment, average bills. Until the local fast food joint went under after a month without business. So I did what everyone else did at that time. I started job hunting. Sending out CVs, going from interview to interview. Losing my hope bit by bit with each phone call. I didn't have anything to stand out from the crowd. No skill that was in demand. I finished high school and figured I would spend the rest of my life working minimum wage and playing video games. My salvation from eviction came out of the blue, in a form I never expected. As a last-ditch attempt, I signed up with a job agency, hoping they would succeed where I had failed. I went through the usual procedure of signing contracts, and they sent out my CV. Barely 3 days later, I got the much-awaited phone call. "It's a pretty unusual gig," the agent told me. "A guy named Seb, about my age and in no better position in life than mine. But it pays well." "I'm game," I said without hesitation. With no savings, a quarter of a gas tank, and only loose change left of my last paycheck, I couldn't turn down anything. "When's the interview?" "No interview," Seb told me. "They want to talk to you over the phone, but from what they told me, it's pretty much an accept and you're hired deal." That's not at all suspicious. "Hey man, it's up to you if you accept," Seb told me. "It's a bit suspicious, but you said you're desperate, so I bumped you up the wait list. It probably pays under the table, but hey." He started, but I cut over him. "It's better than going hungry." "Exactly," Seb said. "So stick with it, but call back. Worst case scenario, you only have to work there until I find you something else." "I will," I assured him. "And thanks." "No problem," he answered. "I'll give them your number. Expect a call in the next few days." And with that, he hung up. I got busy around the apartment with chores, but didn't get 3 minutes deep before my phone rang again. I ran to answer it, having left it charging in the bedroom. "Hello," I greeted as I put it to my ear. "Good afternoon. "Is this Mr. Mark?" A delicate, feminine voice asked. "That's me," I said, stifling a giggle at hearing Mr. and my name used together. "Perfect," the woman said. "My name is Anna, and I'm calling you on behalf of my employer. From what I understand, you're in search of a job." "I am," I answered. "Awesome," Anna said with enthusiasm. Not the corny HR type either, but genuine enthusiasm, like she was happy. "So, how is this gonna work, Miss Anna?" I asked. "Do I come over for some aptitude test or something?" "Oh, no, Anna said with amusement. "Nothing of that sort. Stay on the line and go to your front door," she instructed. Her request was more than a bit concerning, but I did what she had asked of me. I got to my front door, which led to the floor's corridor, and looked through the peephole. I didn't see anyone. "So, do I open it?" I asked. "Yes," Anna answered. "There should be something on your front doorstep." This whole situation felt faker by the moment. At this point, I was expecting it to be a prank from Seb or something. Maybe he actually worked for one of those prank shows and the job agency was just a facade. I opened the door, expecting a jump scare and a nearby camera to catch all of it, but no one was there. Instead, I saw an envelope on my doormat, placed neatly in the center. "An envelope?" I asked. "Yep," Anna answered. "Take it inside and open it." I picked up the dirty yellow thing, pinching it between two fingers as I walked to my kitchen. I sat down at the small table and gingerly opened it, finding a blank piece of old-looking paper inside, along with an expensive-looking fountain pen. "Do you read horror stories online, Mr. Mark?" Anna asked. "Creepypasta, short stories, found footage types." "No, I'm not into reading," I answered. "Never was, especially horror." "Then you'll have to do a bit of research, I'm afraid," she said, and I could tell that a bit of wind was gone from her sails. "Do you want me to write horror stories?" I asked. "I mean, I could, but I'm no Stephen King." "No horror stories, Mr. Mark," Anna assured me. "Your job will consist of writing sets of rules." "Miss Anna, I'll be real with you for a moment. You lost me," I admitted, convinced that I'd blown it anyway. "Let me explain," Anna said quickly. "It all makes sense in a minute." "Go ahead, I'm listening." "Your job will consist in coming up with sets of rules, like I already said. You will be given a setting, usually an unsettling one, and you'll have to build said set of rules around that setting. No story, no characters, and no events, just the rules. Do you understand, Mr. Mark?" "Not really," I admitted. "Read up some stories then. Look for ones where people find rules at new jobs, or when moving to a new home or school. You're bound to find some. Read them and use the pen and paper we provided to write similar rules. When the list is done, place it back inside the envelope and leave it on your doorstep. You have until tomorrow at dusk. If the envelope isn't on your doorstep by then, we'll assume you're not interested." "I'll give it a shot," I said after a few moments of thinking. It wasn't like I had anything better to do with my time. "What's the setting?" "The first one is a test," Anna said. "So make the setting whatever you want. We want to see if you offer what we're looking for. Try to make it as scary as possible," she said cheerily. "I'll give it my best," I said, trying to fake the slightest amount of enthusiasm. "That's the spirit, Mr. Mark," Anna said. "We expect great things from you. I will return with another call after the list is appraised. We will discuss your salary then." We said our goodbyes and she hung up. I made a coffee despite the hour, brought my laptop into the kitchen and started researching. A quick Google search revealed treasure troves of material, many stories like Anna had described, and just as many communities centered around these stories. in communities like this one. I took to reading the most popular stories I found, which in all honesty was a total drag. I really don't like reading. Still, in a few hours I had a good understanding of what I was supposed to do. Some of these stories creep me out, I'll admit. I'm not a horror enthusiast, but I'm not a scaredy cat either. Which is all to say that it takes a bit of effort to get under my skin. By midnight, I picked a setting and churned out the first set of rules. They weren't good or scary by any measure, so I went back on them and did them again, distilling that creepy feeling further. At the time, I thought that maybe I had a knack for writing, a hidden talent that I had never picked up on up to that point. I could already see books with my name on them, earning me serious cash. Looking back on it, I realized it was just the newfound sense of purpose after almost a month without one that had spurred me on. Anyway, after multiple revisions, I was satisfied with the result. So, I wrote the rules on the paper and put it back inside the envelope. Seeing that it was nearly 4 a.m., and I had been awake for almost 22 hours at that point, I went to sleep. I woke up at about 2 in the afternoon, and decided to leave the envelope outside as Anna had instructed, but to keep on the lookout and see who would come for it. I was still convinced it was a prank show or something like that, but I figured I would get some cash for my effort and for the right to broadcast it. And so I waited, eyes glued to the people. 5 minutes turned to 10, and then to half an hour, but no one came. Of course, no one would come, I thought. How would they even know if I don't call them? As I was ready to throw in the towel and call Seb, my phone rang. I recognized the number right away. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mark." Anna greeted me. "Hello," I said. "The list is done. Will you send someone to pick it up?" I asked. "Well, that's what I'm calling you for," Anna answered. "The rules have been appraised. My superiors are very satisfied with your work. You're hired, Mr. Mark." "How? When?" I asked, dumbfounded, opening the door and finding the envelope still there. "You start tonight at 10 p.m., a 9-hour shift including breaks. I will text you the address shortly," Anna said, ignoring my question. "We hope to see you there, Mr. Mark." With that cheerful remark, she hung up. I tried to call back a few times, but it never went through. A chirpy, robotic voice told me that the number was no longer in use. I received a text a few minutes later that contained an address about half an hour away, but trying to call that number gave the same result. I was creeped out before, but this sealed the deal. I didn't know what they were playing at, I just knew that I wanted no part in it anymore. So I resolved to call Seb back, politely asking him, "What the heck?" and to tell him to find me something else. But before I got to do any of that, I noticed something out of place. The envelope was placed neatly in the center of the doormat again. I picked it up cautiously, eyeing the empty corridor for any sign of movement. The envelope felt thicker between my fingers, but ever so slightly lighter than before. Opening it, I found $300 inside in $20 bills. I know that might not sound like much, and it really isn't an exorbitant amount of money, but at that moment, it was a lifesaver for me. So, despite my better judgment, I gave it a try after all. I had already got $300 out of the deal that far, so it was definitely worth my time if nothing else. I went grocery shopping to restock the fridge, filled up the car, cooked and ate a proper dinner for the first time that month, and waited for night to come. I left home 40 minutes before my shift. The phone's GPS picked up the address right away, leading me out of the city and onto some battered country roads. I passed through a few small towns on the way, but barely saw any other cars on the road. The GPS led me off of asphalt and onto beaten dirt at some point, into some dark woods. Alarm bells went off in my head, telling me how bad of an idea this was, but I ignored them. The belief that this was just a prank grew stronger, pushing back against the mounting dread and paranoia. After 10 more minutes through the woods, I saw something between the trees. A 3-story building with a flat rooftop, lined with dark windows. The GPS pointed me straight at it, and as I approached, a tall concrete fence topped with barbed wire came into view. Some empty parking spaces greeted me as I entered the clearing, so I pulled into one. I was close enough to the gate to see that the chain around its handles dangled freely, leaving it unlocked. I got out of my car cautiously, leaving the engine running in case I needed to make a hasty retreat. "Guys, you can come out," I yelled into the silent night. "I know this is a prank, haha, you got me good." No answer came, but I waited for a couple of minutes hoping that they would give up. I was sure there were cameras and some bushes nearby filming me, waiting for my reaction. But instead, as a handful of minutes turned to 10, nothing happened. I walked closer to the gate to try to see if anyone was inside, and the feeling of dread that was steadily building up inside of me shot up to 11. Next to the gate, mounted on the flat surface of the cement fence, was a metal plate. This can't be real. It's impossible, I thought as I read the text on the plate. Sunny Hills Asylum was written on it, along with the address in a smaller font. The location I imagined for my set of rules. They probably got access to my search history, I thought. I probably saw that name somewhere in a story and I appropriated it, and they figured it out. I was half satisfied with my conclusion, but it didn't make my mounting panic go away. If this was some prank show, it was awfully elaborate. I didn't know how to proceed. I was torn between returning to my car to leave or going inside to see this through. Looking back to the forest for any signs of life, I noticed movement in the darkness. Something was there, but it was too fast to be human. It darted between the trees, hiding in their foliage, and I felt a bout of nausea when I caught sight of it again. That sealed it. I didn't want to stick around and risk getting mauled by some wild animal. I pulled out my phone as I power walked to the car, and saw the clock turn to 10 p.m. The car produced a stutter, and I heard its engine die. What the hell? I thought with confusion. The car was a piece of crap, but it didn't have any problems I knew of besides being a bit old. I dashed to it and threw myself in the driver's seat, reaching for the keys to try and start the car. The engine rumbled, but it failed with a pathetic sputter. A flash of movement in the clearing got my attention, as I was about to give it another try, but I lost sight of whatever it was. That was until it collided with the passenger side window, shattering it and raining bits of glass on me. "What the heck?" I yelled, my panic in full swing. Nothing was there, but I knew it could be back any moment. With shaking fingers, I reached for the keys again and tried the ignition. Nothing. "Crap," I yelled, slamming my hand on the steering wheel. My phone rang in my pocket, making me jump back in the seat. I pulled it out, dropped it between the seats, and tried to fish it out. Another impact shook the car, shattering the back window. My fingers snagged on the phone, and I pulled it out in a frenzy. "Help!" I yelled into it the moment I answered the call. "Mr. Mark?" Anna asked in the same calm and sweet tone as always. "We were expecting you inside. Is everything all right?" "Crap, I stuttered. "Something's attacking the car. I'm trapped." "Listen to me, Mr. Mark," Anna said, her voice a bit more urgent. "Keep calm, get out of the car and run inside. They won't follow you." "How do you know?" I asked. "What if?" A loud bang stopped the words in my throat. Something collided with the windshield, sending a spiderweb of cracks rippling through it. I panicked harder, struggling to undo my seatbelt. "Trust me," Anna yelled into my ear. and run inside. I didn't need her to tell me a third time. The moment the seatbelt came undone, I shot out of the car. I landed on all fours and took off like that, getting to my feet after a few moments. Hasty footsteps echoed behind me, but I didn't turn around. I hauled it to and through the gate, in a terror-fueled sprint that I'm sure broke a world record or two. Once inside the yard, I ran to the building's door. I threw myself against it, but it opened without a hitch, so I crashed to the floor. After rolling to a stop on the thin carpet, I took a moment to catch my breath. "Mr. Mark," a voice called from my hands. "Are you still there? Did you make it?" Turned out, I managed to hold onto my phone even through my frantic dash for safety. The display was covered by an intricate fractal of cracks, the result of me running on all fours and smashing it against the pavement. But it still worked. I lifted it to my ear before I spoke. "Yeah," I answered Anna's call. "I made it inside. I think I'm safe." "Great," Anna said. "Please make your way to the 3rd floor. Your office is the 3rd door on the right." Click. She hung up again before I got to ask any questions. The realization that this was no prank, that I was in actual danger, finally sank in. I needed to get out on the double. But I can't get to my car with those things out there, I thought. I decided to put my phone to good use and call for help, but it was nearly impossible to navigate its menu. I couldn't see anything through the cracks. After a few minutes of fumbling around, doing my best to guess where everything was and what I was pressing, I managed to call 911. But the call didn't go through. I probably didn't have reception. "Come on," I whined loudly. Being between a rock and a hard place, I decided my best chance of survival was to play along. Maybe Anna would call me again, and I could tell her I wanted out. I walked to the elevator, idling by its doors while I waited for it to reach me. Looking around, I noticed how empty this place was. There was a receptionist desk at the entrance, but no one manned it. I could see a nurse cabinet through a tall glass door, but no one was inside. Besides my own breathing, there were no other sounds in the building. It felt like I was completely alone. The ding of the elevator shook me free from my stupor. Its doors parted, and I stepped inside cautiously, pressing the button for the 3rd floor. The ride up was short, but not short enough, as it offered me enough time to delve into my thoughts again. The institution's name, its layout, the creatures that attacked me after 10 p.m. None of it added up. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew exactly what was going on. I was just hoping I was wrong. But when the elevator arrived on the 3rd floor, when I opened the 3rd door on the right, when I found a desk sat in front of a wall full of monitors, I realized with terror that I was right. The single, yellowed piece of old paper sat neatly in the desk center sealed the deal. This was the setting I had imagined. With trembling hands, I picked up the piece of paper, recognizing my own handwriting. "You must be the new guy," I read. I dreaded reading further, but I needed to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was what I thought it was. "Sorry I couldn't be there to train you myself. You could have really used my knowledge to succeed in your new duties. Here's hope this list of rules will suffice, and help you see your first night through. If you make it until the morning, I strongly suggest you never come back here. No amount of money is worth it. With my personal advice out of the way, let's get to the rules. Rule number 1. Write your name and time of arrival in the logbook at the front desk at the beginning of your shift. The guard checks the logbook at 10:05 on the dot before making his rounds, and he'll use a deadly force on anyone not signed in. If you forget, you have to avoid the guard for the rest of the night. I wanted to yell out again, in frustration and anger aimed at my own stupidity. I had already broken the first rule, and if the consequences would be what I imagined they would be when I wrote the thing, I broke the most important rule of all. I put the list down and looked at the camera feeds in front of me. Each monitor displayed one of the hospital's many corridors or rooms, but I was searching for one in particular. The reception area came into view, and through the grainy feed, I saw a thick book laying open on the desk. The guard already checked it, but I couldn't see him anywhere. That was bad news. Horrible even. You see, I didn't imagine the guard as a normal, elderly man dutifully doing his rounds with a lantern and radio in hand, or even as a human for that matter. No, the best way to address the guard wasn't him, but it. It was a tall, wide figure striding down the corridors at night, in search of anything out of place. It was a faceless entity, incapable of feeling emotions like empathy or mercy. And it was strong, maybe insanely so, unwavering in its pursuit of ridding the property of unwanted guests. I envisioned the guard as an unlikely ally, something that could brave any adversity one might face during their shift, so long as one followed the rules. Otherwise, the guard was your worst enemy. Scanning the other monitors, I noticed a thick metal door shaking wildly in its hinges. The monitors didn't have any sound, but even so, I heard the metals rattles all the way up on the third floor. I watched with bated breath as the lock broke and the door swung open, revealing the thick darkness inside. Something walked out of that darkness slowly, its eyes lifting to peer into the camera. I felt its gaze land on me through the monitor, freezing me still in my seat. The creature walked away slowly, and I couldn't look away from its mangled form. It was big and bulky, with swollen muscles covered in protruding veins. I don't doubt that any bodybuilder would be envious of its physique, save for the creature's deformities. One of its legs bent backward at the knee, the source of its slowness as it had to drag it along the floor. Its arms were two different lengths, with its right being the longer of the two. It was completely hairless, and had a horrified expression permanently frozen on its face. Simply looking at it kept me paralyzed with fear. After it walked outside of the camera's view, I broke free from the spell. I brought up the paper and kept reading, although I already knew what I would find. Rule number 2. Make your way to the monitoring room right away. You can take whatever route you want, but you have to pass by solitary confinement and say hi to Greg. If you fail to do this, Greg will break out, and we don't want that. In case you forget, you have to call the nurses to sedate him and bring him back to his cell. I had imagined the Sunny Hills Asylum as filled to the brim with patients, but they were all normal people. All save for Greg, who was a bit more special. Born to a possessed mother that was a part of a cult, Greg inherited her strength and wild demeanor. But the cult hadn't been kind to him as he grew up, putting him through rituals meant to bring out his latent powers. That resulted in a myriad of physical and mental conditions, and when the cultists finally got what they wanted, awakening Greg's potential, he slaughtered all of them. He was found by authorities a few months later, roaming the countryside, and they took him in, but he proved to be too strong for them, so they transferred him here to live the rest of his days in confinement. I, of course, know all of that because I made it up myself. Greg wasn't a real flesh and blood person, or at the very least, he was never supposed to be. But the part that broke my heart, I imagined him as needing that tiny bit of reassurance, that fleeting sense that someone in this world cared about him, to keep him sort of sane and docile. It's why I wrote that rule the way that I did, and breaking that rule also broke my spirit. Poor Greg didn't deserve this. None of it. The only silver lining was that Greg wouldn't come looking for me specifically. He would aimlessly wander the building until he was caught. I was tempted to go out and look for him myself, to right my wrong in the slightest, but I knew that was a bad idea. I searched the drawers for a radio and pulled it out when I found it. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" I asked, pressing the button and holding it close to my mouth. Greg broke containment. We need a team of nurses on it ASAP. Copied. A feminine voice answered. Stay where you are. Our nurse will be dispatched to recontain Greg. Only silence followed after that statement, but I breathed a sigh of relief. With that task taken care of, I resumed reading, both to refresh my memory and to hopefully find some explanation for this madness. Rule number 3. Once inside the monitoring room, check the camera feeds once every 30 minutes and report anything out of the ordinary to the guard. Besides the guard and nurses, anything in the corridors at night is considered out of the ordinary. Good, I thought. I'm already doing that. Well, I was doing half of that, to be precise. The monitoring half. I wasn't sure about calling the guard since I didn't log in like I was supposed to, but I decided that I would burn that bridge when I'd get to it. Rule number 4. If the guard comes to check up on you, don't look at him. Only answer his first question, no matter what it is, and don't engage in further talking. He'll try to get you to talk more, but we'll leave after 10 minutes. I was sure that I could ignore this one for tonight. If the guard would come for me, it wouldn't be to ask questions. As for the questions themselves, I didn't have any specific ones in mind when I wrote this one. I thought of the guard asking random but deeply personal questions meant to disturb and provoke you. What it would do if you didn't answer its first question, or if you answered more than one, I don't know. I didn't imagine that far, and that part had scared me. At least with the other rules, I had a rough idea of what would happen if I broke them. I put the paper down and switched to watching the monitors to see Greg's containment attempt. Checking the clock on the wall, I saw that half an hour had passed, but the night was still young. I found the guard patrolling the corridors randomly, but I didn't know enough about the layouts of the building and the cameras to know where he was. I realized that was bad news. Without that knowledge, I couldn't be sure when the guard was nearing me. Another bridge to burn later. Soon after, I found the nurse that was sent out as well. She was, I'm kind of ashamed to admit this, but it's how I had imagined it. I never expected all of this to become real, okay? She was a petite woman with curves and all the right places, and a skimpy, revealing nurse outfit that would have been more at home in an adult movie than a hospital. The only thing that stood out was her face, pale as a ghost with dark lips and eyes, as well as random stitches running over her features. I'm very basic when it comes to horror, okay? I know it, I'm not an aficionado, and I won't pretend that I am. In any case, all of the nurses look like that, with few differences between them. No names and no numbers, no way to tell them apart from one another. They're a hive mind with a singular purpose: contain anyone that's not the guard. But they're pretty dim-witted, easy to outsmart, so I don't worry much about them. Anyway, this particular nurse was a big help, and not just because she had recontained Greg. She walked past the elevator on her way, and I saw the two plastered above the doors. I knew her location, so I could use her to map out the building. I followed her from one monitor to the next, drawing a mental map of wherever she went. And slowly, I figured out where each camera in the building was in relation to each other. That ate away a good portion of the night, about 2 hours or so. She seemed in no hurry to find Greg, or maybe I should have given her more details when I called earlier. I also fulfilled my other task, keeping an eye on all of the monitors for anomalies, and following Greg and the guard as well. My attention was stretched every which way in my attempt to keep track of everything that could kill me. So I didn't notice when one of the monitors had turned to static. Not until that static started spreading past the screen, engulfing the plastic that encased it. And by the time that I saw it, it had already reached the monitors around it. I panicked, picking up the paper to see the rules again. Rule number 5. If you see a static anomaly on the monitors, call the IT department and leave the room immediately. Walk through the building for exactly 15 minutes, The anomaly should be fixed. That was bad news. I knew what the static would do. It would spread across the room and engulf everything. If it touched me as well, it wouldn't be good for my health. And it wouldn't stop at the monitoring room. It would spread outside indefinitely until the IT department stopped it. I jumped out of the chair and grabbed the radio, making my way to the door. I stopped with my other hand on the handle, deciding to call from in here. Even with the static slowly spreading behind me, I knew this room was still safer than the corridors. "Hello," I asked after fumbling with the radio. "I need the IT department. It's an emergency." I cried out into the radio a few more times until someone answered. A sleepy voice broke through the static, sounding very irritated at being disturbed so late into the night. "Sup? What's the problem?" The voice asked, a young man by the sound of it. One of the monitors went full of static," I stammered, "and now it's spreading across the room." "Ah, yes," the IT guy said, sounding thoroughly bored. "You know the protocol for this situation. Leave the room for 15 minutes until you take care of it, right?" I asked. "Yep," he answered. "I'll be right over. And I better not find you there. I can fix the monitors, but I can't fix people." "Got it," I said. I shot the monitors one final look, finding that half of them were gone. I could still see the guard patrolling the ground floor, but I couldn't spot the nurse or Greg anywhere on the remaining monitors. Crap. I left the room quietly, to not give away my position to anyone. The corridor was empty, but I couldn't stay put. The rule wasn't clear on if I had to be on the move for the 15 minutes, so I decided to risk it. I wanted to find a closet somewhere and hide. Now, from what I imagined of the place, there were closets spread through all floors but the third. This floor had the monitoring room, the break room for the nurses, and some other various rooms, but no storage closets. I walked cautiously to the stairs and went down them one step at a time, eyes and ears peeled for any sign of movement. The building was almost pitch dark at night. I was sure that the cameras had some night vision enhancements to allow me to see clearly, but out here, I was nearly blind. My eyes adapted after a while, but just barely. I reached the second floor and found lots of doors lining it, but I didn't know which one was the storage closet I so desperately wanted to crawl into. Most of them were rooms for the patients, but those were locked while the closets weren't, so I tried the doors one by one. I was halfway down the corridor with no lock. All of the doors were closed. As I abandoned door 6 and went for door 7, praying that it would be the one, I saw a shadow coming from behind the corner at the corridor's end. A small shadow walking around with a spring in her steps, like she was skipping merrily through a meadow and not this hellhole. I couldn't make out her features through the dark, but I knew it was one of the nurses, and I knew that she saw me, seeing as my skin crawled and my hair stood up. "Hey," she yelled in a cheery, high-pitched voice. "You're not supposed to be out here. Let me escort you back to your room." Fight or flight kicked in hard. My heart went from idly beating along to drumming at a mile a minute. I turned and sprinted with all that I had, not caring where I would end up, so long as it was away from her. "Hey, stop," she yelled after me. Her footsteps sounded from behind, mixing in with mine as she gave chase. "Don't run through the corridors. You'll hurt yourself. Leave me alone," I yelled as I reached these stairs and jumped down 3 to 4 at a time. "I'm not a patient." "But you can be," she said. I looked back and saw that she had reached these stairs as well. She was like a cheetah on steroids, and compared to her, I was a slug on sleeping pills. She bounded down the stairs with reckless abandon, closing the gap between us with terrifying speeds. I reached the landing and decided, screw it. Either I would break my legs and she would get me, or she would catch up to me regardless. At least this way, I have a chance. I told myself and jumped over the next flight in a single go. I landed with a thud and rolled as the force of the fall pushed me to my knees. Luckily, both of my legs survived, so I took off running. On the next flight of stairs, I did the same, really pushing my luck. I crashed onto the landing, face first against the wall, but I didn't have enough time to assess my wounds. The nurse landed right next to me, so I took off. She tackled me from behind as I was about to jump over the last flight of stairs. Her strength was phenomenal. It was enough to send both of us flying through the air as she had latched onto me. I turned around at the last moment and ended up landing on top of her. She broke my fall, but I got winded. Now, she said in a sweet voice as she pushed me off. I rolled away and got on my hunches, heaving and wheezing as I uselessly gasped for air. You went and hurt yourself, see? I told you not to run through the corridors. Between the tears and the fear, I looked up at her. She got to her feet, perfectly fine despite the fall, and pulled a syringe out from somewhere. I don't know from where, and I don't want to think about it. But let's just say that her skimpy outfit had no pockets to speak of. Here, she said, pointing the needle at me. I fell on my back and crawled away on my elbows, but I knew there was no escaping her. This will calm you down, and then we'll find you a nice, quiet room. I tried to say, but with no air in my lungs, my voice failed me. She stepped onto my foot to stop me and leaned over me. Her free hand shot out and grabbed mine, with such force that I feared she would break my wrist. She held my arm steady and aimed the syringe at my skin, but try as hard as I might, I couldn't break free. The needle touched my skin and was ready to break through into my veins, but an animalistic scream stopped her. We both looked down the corridor at its source and found Greg barging towards us. Before any of us got to react, he punched the nurse away. She flew into a wall, hitting it hard enough to leave a dent. God, I thought. Greg was even stronger than I thought. He reached down to grab me and got a hold of my leg. I was effortlessly picked up and he lifted me high enough to make eye contact. Hanging upside down like I did, with my lungs still burning for air, I nearly shat my pants with fear. Hey, big guy, I stammered. Greg paused, his brows creased, but it wasn't enough to wipe the permanently terrified expression on his face. He tilted his head and stared at me, like a wild animal curious about its prey. You, friend? He asked. His voice was deep and hoarse, breaking around the edges, but I felt warmth behind it. Yes, I struggled to push out an answer. I'm a friend, don't hurt me, okay? Greg was puzzled by my answer. He processed it ever so slowly, but made no attempt to put me down. I was afraid that he couldn't understand me, that he would snap and, in response, snap me as well. But his lips curled into a smile. Friend, he yelled with glee. Greg have friend. He flailed his arms happily, waving me through the air every which way. Yeah, big guy, I answered, feeling the nausea building up. I'm a friend. Put me down slowly, okay? Don't hurt your friend. Greg have friend, Greg have friend, he chanted, and lowered me to the floor a bit too fast. I fell on my head, feeling my neck twist and my shoulders contort, but I wasn't seriously injured. Greg let go of my foot and I got up, wobbly from various aches and riddled with fatigue. What name, friend? Greg asked with excitement. It took me a moment to realize what he meant as he slurred his words pretty badly. Mark, I answered when I finally deciphered it. Mac, Greg yelled back, slurring my name as well. Friend Mac. Close enough, big guy, I said with a dumb smile on my face to match his. I know I should have been way more scared than I was, but I just couldn't be. Despite the way he looked, Greg was a sweet person that life had treated unfairly. Sure, he could snap me like a twig, but at that moment, I was 100% that he wouldn't. "Let play," Greg started but was interrupted. The nurse tackled me out of the blue, sending me off my feet. Now, I played football in high school. I've gotten tackled by guys bigger than me plenty of times, but let me tell you, none of those could compare. I seriously doubt that a professional player could tackle me that hard. I landed on my side some 10 feet away and skidded to a stop on the rough floor. With carpet burns added to the list of injuries I had sustained that far, I looked up. The nurse was face to face with Greg. "No hurt, friend," he yelled at her, loud enough to push her hair backward. But she wasn't fazed at all. She waited for him to finish and brought up the syringe she wanted to use on me earlier. For her own sake, I thought, that thing better be elephant tranquilizer. Greg tried to punch her again, but she ducked below his arm with surprising speed and grace. She reached up and grabbed Greg's wrist, trying to keep him steady. Greg swung his arm upwards and swatted her against the ceiling. She lost her grip on him and fell to the floor, bringing plaster and concrete raining down alongside her. How strong are these freaks? I wondered, and how resilient? If Greg had done that to anyone else, like me for example, I'm pretty sure it would have been an insta-kill. But the nurse got up like nothing had happened and jumped him. The two fought through the corridor, struggling against each other, but there was no clear winner. They seemed evenly matched. Realizing that they were so busy with their scrap that they forgot about me, I decided it was time for me to make my exit. I got on all fours, but their mad brawl had reached me. I took off frantically, avoiding blind kicks and punches and smashes that were strong enough to turn my bones to paste. The nurse flew into the wall next to me as I had reached a corner, and looked at me as she crashed to the floor. I felt my skin tighten a size or two when she had reached for me, but Greg's arm came at her from behind me and grabbed her again. Looking back at them wrestling like two mythical bees, I took the corner and ran away blindly. I don't think I got 10 steps away before I collided with something and got sent on my butt. I slowly turned my head to look ahead, and my horrified gaze landed on the slender figure of the guard. "What's up with this commotion?" he asked, despite lacking a mouth. His voice emanated from the space around him, a low and ominous baritone that rattled my guts. "Who are you? What's your name?" I didn't answer. I got up and ran back towards Greg and the nurse. "Halt!" The guard yelled after me and gave chase. At least he wasn't as fast as the nurse, but he was still on my heels. Greg's and the nurse's fighting moved, reaching the reception area, and we found him smashing her against the thick reception desk. With each slam, the wood splintered and groaned until it gave way. "Identify yourself," the guard repeated from behind me. I decided to forget it. All of it. I ran towards the exit, toward the outside world filled with less madness than this place. I'd start my car, drive away, and never look back. But the guard grabbed the collar of my shirt and stopped me, only steps away from the door. He pulled me back with a swift motion that cut my breath short, muttering hooligan under his breath. "Back," Greg yelled. As the guard spun me, ready to throw me down on my belly, I caught a glimpse of Greg. He had syringes sticking out of him at various points in his body, all with their plungers down. His moves were slower, stuttery, and his eyes were half closed. He ran towards me and the guard, his steps wobbly, and punched it away. Like the nurse had done plenty times tonight, the guard flew face first into a wall. "Go," Greg yelled and grabbed one of my legs. "Friend, be safe." And with that, he threw me out a window. I crashed through it, landing outside on a carpet of grass and shards of glass. Greg's stunt was helpful as far as getting me out of immediate danger, but it hadn't been too kind to my body. Between being thrown like a rag doll, flying out of a window, and crashing to the ground from about 7 feet, I was pretty banged up. My hands and face were uncovered, so they got peppered with shallow cuts. My leg ached from the force of being yanked, so badly that I was sure I would develop a limp. and the rest of my body just hurt, like all over the place. I was pretty sure I had pulled a muscle or 10. This will come back to bite me tomorrow, I thought. That's if I see tomorrow. I laid on the ground for a bit, allowing my body a brief reprieve before I would force it to move and do things again. My breathing leveled and my pulse slowed, but I didn't want to get up until I would absolutely have to. After a few moments, I heard a loud thud from inside the building, and I realized that it had been Greg. The anesthetics finally did him in. The sound of his body being dragged along the floor followed soon. I wanted to get up. I wanted to so badly. I wanted to barge in there and help him, but I knew it wouldn't end well. Saddened for my new friend that had saved my life twice, I got up slowly. Just like I had suspected, my leg had trouble supporting my weight. Back inside the building, I decided I would try to get to my car and start it up. That decision was fueled by fear and it was stupid. I knew as much, but it wasn't an all-around bad plan. The car either ran out of battery or it needed a few puffs of starter fluid. Luckily, I had both of those in the trunk so I could start it up. But then, I remembered the creatures that had chased me in here and got me into this mess. I could start up the car, but for that, I needed time. And I was pretty sure they wouldn't let me have it. I could hear them skittering outside. There were a lot of them now. Back inside it is, I thought. I reached into my pocket, remembering that I had stashed the list there before I left. I got it out, unfolded it, and struggled to read it under the moon's washed-out light. Rule number 6. If you ever encounter the night shift nurses, run. Hide as soon as you break line of sight and wait for them to wander off before coming out. Keep on the lookout for them while in the monitoring room, and if you see them approach the door, hide beneath the desk. Well, that one was useless now. Rule number 7. Don't interact with the patients. Don't question or answer them. And above all else, don't make deals with them. Yes, one of these stranger rules. I left it vague, sort of on purpose, but mostly because I couldn't think up any deals. Now it had the potential to screw me over big time. Rule number 8. If you hear screams, ignore them. If these screams get closer, ignore them harder. You can use headphones to block them out. These screams won't enter your room unless you let them in, so don't. I don't need to worry about this one until I make it back, I thought. The screams had only happened if I was inside the monitoring room. Just like the guard's voice, they were disembodied, coming out of empty space. They would start somewhere in the hospital and make their way towards you, stopping outside the door and idling there for 10 to 15 minutes. If you can ignore them, the worst they'll do is give you a good scare. But as they grow louder and louder, some might try to flee or find out what causes them. If you open that door and let them in, they'll do a lot more than just scare you. They'll swarm you like, well, a swarm of bees. Only there will be screams instead of buzzing, and no actual bees. They'll follow you around from that point on, their volume increasing exponentially. At that point, you'd be better off finding the closest window and jumping out. I don't know enough about the human anatomy and how sound affects it, but my best guess is that your eardrums will go first. After that, maybe your eyes sense they're pretty soft. At any rate, the screams will eventually get loud enough to liquefy your bones, but it'll take a while, and every moment of it will be complete and utter agony. Rule number 9. Don't leave the building until your shift is over. Rule number 10. If you leave the building before your shift is over, under any circumstances, don't leave the yard. Get back inside as fast as possible. All of the doors and windows will be locked, so call the guard to let you back inside. I let out a long, groaning, "Come on." It wasn't like I would leave the yard. I wasn't particularly thrilled to find out if I could outrun the forest creatures, but I couldn't exactly call the guard either, and I couldn't break in through the windows without coming to get me. The only other alternative was to sneak in through the basement. If outside the asylum was bad and inside was worse, then the basement was a whole nother can of heck no. I was torn on what I should do, until a boulder the size of a watermelon fell from the sky right next to me. What the crap? I yelled, hurrying along. More boulders came, all big enough to crush me. The forest creatures got impatient and seemingly decided to get me one way or another. They were afraid to enter the yard because of the guard, I was sure of it, but they didn't have any gripes with hurling stones. Realizing they had aimed by sound since they couldn't see me over the fence, I tried to be as quiet as possible as I moved away. A couple more boulders fell where I had been only moments ago, but the rest started flying randomly. I made it to the side of the building without getting hit, and found the trapdoor that led to the basement. It was locked, the deadbolt chained and bound with a bulky lock. Crap, I grumbled, quietly enough not to be heard. Writing and imagining the rules, I forgot to include a keychain with useful keys somewhere in there. I was out of luck, or so I believed until another boulder landed nearby with a heavy thud. I shuffled in front of the hatch, drew in a deep breath, and got ready to put my plan into action. "Your aim sucks," I yelled into the night. The words barely left my throat, and I saw a boulder flying over the fence. I got out of dodge just in time, and it fell on the heavy trapdoor with a metallic squeal. But the chain and the lock survived. They were too thick. "That's all?" I yelled, getting back in front of the door. I caught that pebble with a single hand. Another pebble came flying, crashing down on the door, and then another one, and then there was a pause. I heard something heavy being dragged towards the fence from the forest, and saw the boulder's top rise in the air before it was launched with great effort. This one was much bigger, about the size of a generous beach ball, the ones that reach all the way to your waist. I jumped out of the way, landing on my stomach, and heard it crash through the trapdoor. Back up on my feet, I saw the stairway leading to the basement, with the boulder at its base. "Hey, thanks, suckers," I yelled and quickly went inside. A few more boulders came flying, but they all landed in front of the door where I had been. I descended these stairs slowly, entering the murky darkness as stale air invaded my nostrils. This place stank of decay, rot, and mold. Light bulbs hung above from the ceiling, but their light was choked by age and a thick layer of dust that settled on their glass. I could barely see a few feet ahead, but my leg wouldn't let me hurry anyway, and so I limped ahead, a hand on the wall to my left, looking for the exit. The thing about the basement is that it's huge, crisscrossed by narrow corridors and mystery rooms that rearrange themselves every night. Finding your way around them will always be hard, no matter how many times you do it, but I figure no sane person would want to be there twice. But the worst part, I never imagined anything specific for those mystery rooms. Dang things could contain anything. Halfway down the corridor, I came across the first room. It emerged from the murky darkness as I approached it, and I was of half a mind to just pass by it. But knowing this place, any one of the rooms could hold the exit, so I needed to take a risk. My fingers curled around the cold metal of the handle, and I opened the door ever so slowly. Its rusty hinges cried into the corridor as it cracked open, and I risked a peek inside. The room was big and much warmer than the air outside, almost inviting actually, seeing as the chill of the night followed me in. I took a hesitant step inside, ready to bolt at the slightest sign of trouble. The walls to my left and right were crisscrossed by a tangled mess of copper pipes, and ahead of me laid a looming beast with fiery insides. An ancient-looking boiler patiently burning through its fuel as it heated the hospital, offering warmth and traces of flickering light to the room in the process. I reached my hands out and approached it, having somehow missed the fact that my fingers were freezing. As I got close enough to warm them up, I finally took notice of the ragged old man dozing off in the chair next to the boiler. My breath hitched, and my throat made a whimper. The man's eyes opened and he rubbed sleep in them for a moment before they settled on me. Finally, he said with a groggy voice. They finally sent some fresh fuel down here. What? He didn't answer me. Just got up from the chair, opened the boiler's door, and rustled the embers inside with a fire poker. The burnt-out things took a breath of fresh air, igniting weakly, and I realized that my fingers hadn't warmed up in the slightest. My whole body went a few degrees cooler, actually, and the low temperatures impaired my judgment. Come on now, the man urged, jabbing a thumb at the boiler. Hop in. You'll warm up very nicely in there and the cold will be gone. The voice was so sincere and comforting that I had trouble doubting him. He didn't sound like one of the abominations birthed by this insane place. Sounded like a worried dad talking to his young son. In an instant, my mind went wobbly and reason escaped out of my head through my ears. Hearing and sight went blurry, and I felt colder than I ever had in my life. I needed heat, and I needed to warm up so badly. I took a step towards the boiler, and then another one, and another one, under the old man's soft gaze. With a reassuring smile and gentle hands, he took a hold of my shoulders and helped guide me on the final stretch. In that moment, I truly felt that this was the right thing to do. That snuggling on top of burning cold and being set ablaze would have been a good thing. And I am 100% sure that a weaker-willed person would be burning up in that boiler by now. But I had seen some stuff that night and it changed me. Even lulled as I was by the cold and the old man's words, a small part of me fought back. When I got close enough to the boiler to see inside of it, when I saw that those weren't embers, but blackened bones cracked by heat, I snapped out of it. You're almost there, the old man said, pushing my head down so I would go in. Without warning, I turned and elbowed him in the face. He was caught off guard and stumbled back, tripping and falling to the floor. I took off, hurt leg be damned, giving it all to reach the door. It closed behind me when I wasn't looking, and I realized that it wanted to trap me in, but I was having none of it. I jumped through the air shoulder first, determined to break the door and run for my life. The only problem was that the door opened towards the room, not towards the corridor. I bounced off of it and landed on my butt, with pain erupting from my shoulder. Get in the boiler, Fuel, the old man yelled, and I remembered that he existed. Looking back at him, I saw he was back on his feet. Fire poker in hand, he charged at me with a vigor that his old bones shouldn't have been able to muster. I got up and opened the door, narrowly dodging his attempt at turning me into a human shish kebab. His frail appearance proved to be a lie. That much became clear when he hit the sturdy metal door instead of me, and the fire poker still penetrated it. I didn't waste any time. I ran further down the corridor in hopes of finding the exit before getting turned into human kindling. I heard the old man yell from behind me, giving pursuit after he had freed the fire poker. A junction came up ahead, and I decided to coin flip it. Well, mentally at that rate, seeing as I didn't have time to flip an actual coin, I decided to go left. The moment I turned and saw a dead end some 10 feet away, I decided that maybe I should turn right instead. Jerking around and breaking into a sprint, I barely avoided another attempt by the old man at impaling me. As I dodged below the fire poker, feeling its tip brush against my hair and hearing it hit the concrete wall instead, I wondered if the old man was related to Vlad Tepes or something. It would have explained his obsession with impaling, if nothing else. Anyway, ancestry of my pursuer aside, I kept running. He had a bit more trouble freeing the fire poker from the wall, so he fell behind. I rounded another corner, breaking his line of sight, and was met with another door. Without thinking, I went to open it and hid inside before he would catch up. I hastily closed it behind me and slid down to the floor, propped against it. This night was turning out to be much more than I could handle. I just wanted to crash to the floor and never get up again. As my mind settled and my breathing smoothed out, I realized that the cold was gone from my bones and the warmth caused by exhaustion spread through my body. It felt so good not to be freezing anymore that I can't even describe it. Hello! I heard someone call from up ahead. I sighed deeply. The asylum just wouldn't let up, would it? I didn't want to see who or what had called out. I jumped to my feet and dashed back out into the corridor. There you are, Fuel. The old man yelled and lunged at me. It was about at that time that I noticed his aim really sucked, like really bad. He missed me again and impaled one of the nurses that followed me outside. More fuel, he yelled, dropping her dying body to the ground. I ran away, looking over my shoulder for a split second. The old man led the charge, followed closely behind by a handful of nurses with syringes. I hoped that they would sedate him as well. At least then, I would have one less pursuer to worry about. But of course they didn't. Sir, don't run through the corridors. We can find you a nice room, sir. Fuel, fuel. Their screams echoed from behind, pushing me forward despite my mounting fatigue and wounds. We ran at random through the twisting basement, and I opened every door in my wake, hoping that one of them would reveal the exit to me. In one room, I found a crematorium. The cursory glance I could spare revealed stretchers covered with sheets, hiding bloated, rotting bodies beneath. A cremation chamber sat against the opposite wall, but it looked like it hadn't been used in a while. I didn't get to gather more details. The bodies on these stretchers jolted up, shambling towards the door with great speed. A nurse yelled from behind and tried to tackle me. I dodged and her needle missed its mark. She flew over me, straight into the arms of one of the corpses, and I quickly shut the door. Screams soon followed, of agony from the nurse and of twisted pleasure from the corpses. But I didn't stay to listen. I kept running. Another door, another mystery. Even from halfway across the corridor, I saw the twirling tendrils of pure darkness lapping at the air outside from beneath the door. My hand snagged on the handle as I passed it by, and I swung it open behind me. A glance over my shoulder revealed more tendrils shooting out. Grabbing a hold of two of the nurses and reeling them into the room at neck-breaking speeds, the door shut itself closed. That only left two nurses and the old man, but that was still three too many. I could only run for a couple more minutes at most. I needed to either shake them or get rid of them before I would collapse. Another T-junction came up and I veered to the left, breaking the line of sight. A few steps later, there was an X-junction as well. Perfect. I took a hard right, finding a door that I entered silently. Nothing yelled at me, nothing attacked me, so I figured I was safe enough. I kept my ear pressed against the door for a bit, but I didn't hear my pursuers pass. They lost me. Thank God. I slid to the floor, sprawling on my back as I took greedy breaths. My feet burnt and my hurt leg screamed agony at me. As my mind settled on my head, I took in my surroundings. The room was better lit than the rest of the basement, but it was still eerily dark. Cabinets with bottles of various sizes and cardboard boxes lined the walls, and it didn't take me very long to figure out that it was medicine. In the center of the room was a rusty operating table, with broken lights hanging above it and a cart of medical instruments next to it. Moof. My eyes trailed up ever so slowly, horrified by what I had seen. The first thing that came into view was a hand, secured to the table with a thick leather strap. A set of terrified eyes glinted in the dark followed, their gaze pinned on me. I got on all fours and made my way to the table, using it to prop myself up. The woman bound to it kept trying to cry out, but her mouth was gagged. All of her limbs were bound to the table, and she was dressed in the same skimpy uniform that all the other nurses wore. I won't hurt you, I tried to calm her down. I'm not one of those freaks, I'm trapped in here too. Her struggle ceased. but she didn't take her eyes off of me. I reached behind her head, undoing the gag. "Keep quiet, they're looking for me outside," I whispered. She nodded her head, and so I pulled the gag away. Her chest inflated as she drew in a deep breath, but she didn't as much as squeak. "Thank you," she whispered. "Please free me, the nurses might be back at any moment now." I got to work on the straps around her wrists, but they were too tough. When I realized that I couldn't undo them, I took to checking the cart for anything that I could use. The tools were all rusty and caked in dried blood, but one of these scalpels looked sharp enough. "What happened?" I asked, as I carefully sawed through the strap. "How'd you get here?" "I saw an ad in the paper," she said, "looking for night shift nurses. I came to check it out, and a tall, faceless thing jumped me. Next thing I know, the nurses sedated me, and I woke up here." She kept talking, but focused as I was uncutting through the restraints. I missed most of it, but I let her keep at it. I figured it helped her stay calm. The few bits and pieces I did catch her stuff, like her name, Charlotte, or the fact that she quit her job at the hospital because of the pandemic, afraid she would catch the bug too. But she still wanted to help people, so she had resolved to find work as a nurse for the elderly or the disabled. Charlotte was a good person, and she didn't deserve any of this, just like Greg hadn't. That fueled my resolve to see through this, but I couldn't put more force behind it and risk slitting her wrist. Still, slowly and steadily, the cut advanced until the strap fell away. "Here," I said, grabbing another scalpel and putting it in Charlotte's free hand. "You get to work on your other hand, and I'll get started on your legs. We don't know how much time we have left." "Okay," Charlotte whispered with worry. She grabbed the scalpel tight and did as I instructed. I moved on the bed and started cutting the strap around her left leg. We would hopefully be done at the same time and join our forces for the last strap. Time had a tendency to go wobbly when you're stressed out of your mind. A second can stretch into what feel like hours, and hours can meld together into what feels like mere seconds. In what felt like a heartbeat, I was done with the strap around Charlotte's left leg. But looking up at her, she still had a ways to go on hers. I wanted to move on to her other leg, and then go back up and help her finish. That was my plan. But when the door started creaking as it opened, and when I dropped my scalpel and instinctively hit under the table, my plan fell apart. I heard Charlotte get startled. I heard her trying to hurry up so much that she ended up cutting her own skin. I heard her cries, her pleas for help as the nurse entered the room. Her whimpers as she asked for a mercy that she would never receive. The nurse walked over to the table, never said a single word, nothing. All I heard were Charlotte's pleas breaking apart as she sobbed. I was too terrified, paralyzed by my own cowardice as the nurse's feet stopped inches in front of my face. There was a struggle above me, but it was short-lived. The nurse overpowered Charlotte, and I heard the sickening sound of flesh tearing before her. She began gargling. Her hands grabbed the table, fingers and knuckles turning white from the effort, as she pulled herself over the edge in a final, desperate attempt to flee. My tears started flowing, and I barely held back my cries. Charlotte dangled from the two remaining straps, her face right in front of me, her eyes peering deep into mine. In them, I saw a fear unlike any other, unlike any I thought possible. The fear of someone certain of their own fate and unable to change it. "I'm so sorry," I mouthed, afraid to even whisper. Spurts of blood escaped her cut throat, and the scalpel embedded in her flesh fell to the floor with a clatter. Life left her eyes as her pupils dilated, but they remained wide open, her last moments of fear frozen on her face. The nurse walked around the table and hoisted Charlotte's corpse back up, laying her on the dirty sheets haphazardly. "I am terribly sorry," the nurse said, turning her back to us and walking to one of the cabinets. "But you wouldn't cooperate on your induction. Still, I think you'll love it here. you'll be working with Mr. Gregg. He can be a handful at times, but he's mostly harmless." I saw her open the cabinet and rifle through the contents. She pulled an empty syringe out of thin air and began filling it up with drops from various vials. A mellow tune left her lips as she began humming, and I figured this was my chance to get out of there. I was sorry for Charlotte, but there was no point risking my life for her corpse, as cowardly as that might sound. Luckily, the nurse left the door wide open when she entered. I scurried towards it on all fours, making as little sound as possible, and got out of the corridor unnoticed. Looking back one final time, I saw the nurse walking back towards the table and injecting Charlotte's dead body with the concoction that she had brewed. Charlotte convulsed, heaving for air as her back arched up from the sheets, but settled after a long moment. After she had calmed down, she snapped the remaining restraints like they were nothing and looked beneath the table. I was hopeful for all of a second, thinking I would get another unlikely ally. But when Charlotte opened her mouth and talked, that hope was taken away from me. "Is something the matter?" the nurse asked her. "Yes," she answered matter-of-factly, her voice as cold as the darkest polar night. "We have a potential patient running around." I ran away before Charlotte and the other nurse got a chance to see and pursue me, but soon enough I slowed down. Partly because I wanted to make less noise and avoid attracting unwanted attention, but partly because I wanted to save what little strength I had left in case I actually needed to run. I explored the basement for maybe 15 minutes before it dawned on me that this place was much bigger than it ought to be given the building size. Hell, even including the yard and the entire clearing, this basement was still too big. So, either the basement inside was bigger than its outside, or I had a forest above me right now. Plus, there were barely any doors, most of it was dark, empty corridors. I finally found another door, and opened it cautiously. The last thing I needed was to run into another nurse's den. And taking a peek inside, I saw the room was chock full of mannequins. Freaking mannequins. And a supernatural asylum's basement. Why? There was no exit though, so I left the mannequin room behind. Barely a few turns later, I heard footsteps from up ahead. Hasty but not really hurried, so I figured they hadn't found me yet. I turned around, walking carefully, hoping they would take a different turn from mine and lose me. Yet, as I neared the mannequin room again, I knew that wouldn't be the case. More footsteps came from the opposite direction, pinning me in the middle. Distraught but not eager to be found, I snuck back into the mannequin room. I retreated among them, reaching one of the corners opposite of the door and laid down. The footsteps came, paused next to the door, and a nurse opened it. At that moment, I was grateful for the fact that I wasn't there, ear pressed to the metal like I wanted to do at first. "Is the patient in there?" another nurse asked the first. "I don't think so, I don't see him," the first nurse answered. "Okay," the second nurse said. "I'll go on ahead and keep searching. You keep on the lookout in case he passes by." "Okay," the first nurse said. She closed the door, muttering creepy things under her breath. I took a deep inhale to ease my nerves, careful not to make too much sound when I exhaled. This predicament was bad to say the least. I had no way out of the room now. Maybe I can just stay here for the night, I thought, weighing my options. They're night shift nurses after all. Maybe they go to sleep in the morning. I was half satisfied with my plan, but in retrospect, I know I was ready for the most ludicrous of mental gymnastics so long as I could rest. I laid down on my left side, with my back against the wall and facing the door. Although I could only see a narrow slice of its bottom between the sea of mannequin legs that laid between me and it. A few minutes passed like that, with breathing being my sole physical activity. I saw the nurse's feet through the gap beneath the door. She walked back and forth outside like the world's most dutiful guard. My eyelids grew heavy and I fell into shallow episodes of microsleep, but I didn't allow myself to go fully under. I couldn't afford to be unconscious in a place like this. Still, sleep is a mighty beast. With help from the mind-numbing fatigue in my bones, sleep did me in eventually. I didn't dream. In fact, I didn't sleep all that long. It was short and fitful, slain by a voice calling out from around my hip. It jolted me awake, sending my mind reeling with panic and making my heart beat a mile a minute. "Mr. Mark," the voice asked. "Come in, Mr. Mark. Are you okay?" It took me a second to realize that it was Anna, and it took me another second to realize she was speaking out of the walkie-talkie clipped to my belt. I retrieved it, still shaking wildly from the unexpected awakening, and I pressed the talk button. "Keep quiet," I whisper-yelled into it. "Mr. Mark," Anna said, completely disregarding my request. "You are still alive. That's a pleasant surprise. But you appear to be in the basement at the moment." "Yeah," I said, hoping the spite attached to my words wouldn't get lost in the low volume of my voice. "I'm in the freaking basement, being chased by abominations." "Language, Mr. Mark," Anna said. Her sweet, pleasant voice turned deep and reverberating, sending a rattle through my bones. "Anyway, how do you like the mannequin room?" "I know you just love mannequins, don't you, so I couldn't not include it," she continued in her normal customer service voice. "We need to talk about that," I said, "and about this whole mess while we're at it." "We do," she agreed. "Meet me in my office on the ground floor. It's right by the reception." She hung up, not before giving me directions to the elevator. Great, I thought. Of course, the only exit from here is the elevator. I pulled out the list and read the next rule, to refresh my memory on what it had to say about the elevator. Rule number 11. Take the stairs if you can help it. If you absolutely 100% have to take the elevator, wait for a bit before getting out. If the floor seems off, chances are it is. Use the elevator to bring you back to the floor you left from, not any other floor. Also, if new buttons appear in the elevator, refrain from pressing them. They'll be gone the next time. Just great, I thought. I got up and threaded the jungle of mannequins slowly, shuddering a bit each time I had to touch one. I was surprised that the nurse outside hadn't heard the conversation, but I decided not to look that gift horse in the mouth. Halfway to the door, in the middle of the dozens of mannequins, the lights in the room started dimming. Please no, I prayed, terrified of the prospect of having to navigate between them and complete darkness. Dropping to my hunches to get a better view of the door, I saw the tendrils of darkness tentatively probing the room. They advanced slowly in unison, stopping to feel their surroundings every so often. Under my paralyzed stare, one of them reached the foot of a mannequin. It did a double take, pulled back, and shot at the mannequin's chest. The plastic body started writhing, growing veins of pure black across its surface. When the tendril was done infecting the mannequin, it pulled back and let it stand on its own. The next part happened too quickly. I got on my feet and bolted, pushing mannequins out of the way as I advanced towards the door. The tendrils joined in an infecting frenzy, hitting and animating all of the plastic monstrosities around me. By the time I reached the door, all of the mannequins followed me, and the tendrils set their sights on me as well. All caution thrown aside, I opened the door, only to run into the nurse. Before she got to react, I grabbed her shoulders and threw her into the arms of the mannequins. Go left, go right, go left again, I thought. I followed the directions that Anna had given me, with a tidal wave of crazed vessels of darkness on my heels. They pushed and climbed and rushed past each other, all caution discarded in their attempt to catch and convert me as well. I ran across more nurses on my way, but I pushed all of them to the ground and kept going. Before long, on the verge of collapsing and hyperventilating my lungs out, I saw the doors of the elevator at the end of the corridor. They were wide open, the lights inside of it bright and inviting. I rushed in, pressed the button for the ground floor repeatedly, praying for the thing to close faster. It did so in the nick of time, and I heard the massive mannequins slamming against the doors as I began ascending. The ride was too short for me to catch my breath or mentally prepare myself. The doors parted with a cheery ding, and I saw the guard's face on the other side. "There you are, you hooligan," it yelled and dove at me like an Olympic swimmer. I ducked below him, pressing the button for the basement on my way out. The guard crashed into the back of the elevator, and the doors closed in front of it before I got out. "No, no, no," it yelled, with fear rather than frustration, which helped put the basement into perspective for me. The elevator departed, taking the guard off to meet the fate that had been reserved for me. I turned and headed for the reception desk, finding Anna's door right away. Now that I knew to look for it, it stood out like a sore thumb. Large, beautifully ornate dark wood, with a shiny gold plaque in its center that read, "Anna Lilith." Could that be any more telling? I wondered as I approached the door and knocked on it gently. "Come on in, Mr. Mark," Anna called out. I did what she said, entering her office as cautiously as I did the basement rooms. The inside was impressive, a gorgeous far cry from the rest of the asylum. Neat bookshelves occupied the walls. There was a spotless hardwood floor, and her desk sat at the opposite end of her room. A large window took up the wall behind her, allowing the moon's light to shine in and cast soft shadows on her features. "Take a seat, Mr. Mark," she said, gesturing to the armchair in front of her. "I'm not wrong in my assessment that you could really use it, am I?" she asked with a devious grin. "You're not," I admitted with a frown and made my way to it. Anna looked as normal as any other woman you might meet, though I would wager she turned a few more heads, which is to say that she's good looking, but still average. Hazel eyes, black hair kept in a tight office bun, a pair of classy glasses, and a pencil skirt and blouse duo. Imagine your run-of-the-mill businesswoman, and you'll have a good picture of her. "So, what do you think of your job so far, Mr. Mark?" she asked after I had made myself comfortable in the armchair. My head felt like it had just exploded. Was she for real? "It sucks," I yelled, losing what little bits of composure I had left. "What is this place? What are you? What?" Anna smashed her hand on the desk, cracking the wood and stopping my words in my throat. The skin on her arm turned burning red all the way up to her shoulder and cheek, covered with scales of hot, sharp obsidian. Her teeth went from pearly whites to sharp and jagged, and her angered expression displayed them clearly. Her now shining yellow eyes pinned me in place. "I said watch your language," she yelled in that same deep, demonic voice from earlier. I pushed back so hard into the armchair that I nearly toppled over. She took a deep breath, stifling her rage and exhaling a puff of smoke. Her eyes turned back to their soft hazel, and the scales slowly descended back into her skin as it reverted to tan white. When she was back to normal, she sat down and smiled again like nothing had happened. "I've shown you respect thus far, Mr. Mark," she said. "I don't think it's unfair to ask for you to reciprocate and be respectful as well." "No, it's not," I said in a squeaky voice, scared out of my wits. Sorry." "Apology accepted," she said cheerily. "Now that mutual respect has been reestablished, let's try that again. What do you think of your job so far, Mr. Mark?" "It's scary," I said, forgetting all of the profanities I wanted to hurl at her. "I want out." "Aw," Anna said with disappointment. "Me and my employers have found your work very satisfactory this far, Mr. Mark. We'd hate to see you go." "Just look at me," I said, motioning my hands around my bruised body. I'm a wreck, and this was only the first night. I don't think I could survive another. You'll get better, Anna tried to reassure me. I'm sure that if you stick with us, you'll grow to be one of our most valued employees. What makes you so sure, if I might ask? I said. As her words rolled around my head, I did a double take and quickly added, and wait, one of. You may ask, Anna said with a chuckle. I am sure because I've seen you survive your first night against rules you yourself have made. Most others don't. Sorry, but I still want out, I said. I'm not cut out for this. Maybe this will change your mind, Anna said. She waved her hand through the air. Her palm burst into flames and hellish smoke, and when they died down, she held an envelope much like the one I had found on my doorstep. With a glint in her eyes and certainty in her actions, she handed it to me. I opened it to find $500 inside. I wanted to throw the banknotes on the desk and to tell her politely that no amount of money was worth going through another night like this. But as if knowing what I was about to do, she stopped me. Her hands reached into her drawer in her desk, and she pulled out a manila envelope that she had laid down in front of me. That would have been your assignment for tonight, she said, gesturing for me to open it. But seeing how this night proceeded, I can understand that you never found it in your room, and you were unable to complete it. You'll be forced to send it to another writer if you quit, Mr. Mark. I opened the thing, not knowing better than to not follow her orders. A pile of papers came out, among which were familiar blueprints of an apartment, as well as a essay-length piece about it. I scanned them, my blood growing cold in my veins as the realization sunk in. That was my apartment, the one I was currently living in, as well as a slew of information about it and myself. This was a threat, plain and simple. This is... I almost whispered, my shock and terror overwhelming me. Or, Anna said, we can scrap that assignment. You can take the money I've offered you, and you can go home early tonight. And I can see you here tomorrow night at 10 p.m. sharp. Take your time to think about it, Mr. Mark. My mind ran every which way, trying to put the puzzle together. Anna was some sort of demon, or at the very least, she had access to supernatural powers. She also had access to my mind, to my physical condition and whereabouts, and to anything pertaining to me. And most importantly, she had access to other writers. My life was in her hands, and she had the option to turn it into a living hell. Countless days and nights just like this one, no matter where I would go and what I would do. And to top it all off, I wouldn't have the intimate knowledge about the rules that I had tonight. The intimate knowledge that helped me survive so far. With a heavy heart and after much deliberation with myself, I accepted her offer. I'm ashamed to admit it, to shine a light on my cowardly nature once more, but it's the truth. And I'm sure most folks would accept as well if put in my situation. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Mark, Anna said. Remember, 10 p.m. sharp, and don't forget to follow the rules. Before I got to answer, a knock on the door interrupted us. Anna looked at me with a smile. You mind getting that for me, Mr. Mark? Sure, I answered and got up. I walked over to the door absentmindedly, my head ravished from all the realizations and decisions I had to make. Another knock came, so I hurried to open it. On the other side, I found a small old lady in a torn straitjacket. The next rule flashed through my head, but I had no time to react. Rule number 12. Martha will knock on your door every few nights. Only let her in if she has a tray of cookies in her hands. She'll offer you one, but only take a chocolate chip cookie. But Martha had no tray of cookies, and I had just broken another rule. She lunged at me, faster and more vicious than her frail frame should have allowed, and got a hold of my arm. In a single fluid motion, she sent me hurtling through the air. I came crashing down on Anna's desk, with her in tears from laughing all the way. "Come on, Mr. Mark," she said through the hollers. "What did I just say? How did you not see that coming?" Heaving for air, I couldn't answer her. And anyway, I had more pressing matters to focus on, like Martha running spastically towards me. "Go back to your room," Anna said. Her eyes turned yellow once again, and her words as heavy as lead. Her voice held such strength that I almost got up and followed Martha, but I didn't. Martha stopped her vicious assault, turning docile right away. She left the office, closing the door behind her. I took a moment to regain my senses before getting up from the desk, and was surprised to find out that I didn't have any broken bones after that stunt. 10 p.m. sharp, I said, and I left the office. "That's the spirit, Mr. Mark," Anna answered, ripping apart the papers in the manila envelope. I left her office and closed the door behind me. As I reached the reception desk, I pulled out the list one final time and read the last one. Rule number 13. Some of these instances can and will overlap. If that happens, proceed to pray to your deity of choice for luck. You'll need it. Guess I prayed hard enough, I thought, leaving the list on the reception desk. And that was my first night working for Rules Inc. Nothing else happened. I walked back to my car without incident. The corridors of the asylum were empty. The forest creatures had scurried away, and my car started up just fine. I drove home, crashed in my bed, and slept until midday without as much as turning. Now for some more details that I discovered in the meantime, because yeah, I still work there. Think of me what you want for that. I'll structure this next part sort of like a list because I suck at summarizing. The Sunny Hills Asylum. First off, the asylum itself, even though I made it up, it's a real location now. I've been able to find mentions of it in the local library, and if you feed the address into Google Maps, it'll take you there. No, you can't have the address, and no, you can't find it on the internet by searching. I assume this is intentional. Anna probably doesn't want unexpected guests. You can find other locations with the same name, be them real or fictional, but none of them are this one. I've tried coming here during the day, but the dirt road loops through the forest and always brings me back where I start. And going in on foot has the same result. I can't find the clearing or the building unless I'm driving to it for work. The rules. I still have to abide by these same rules every night. I get to the asylum, go up to the monitoring room on the 3rd floor, after writing my name in the logbook and passing by Greg to say hi, and I find that night's assignment in my drawer. Most nights are much more peaceful than the first, seeing as I follow the rules to the letter now. At most, I'll get chased around by the nurses for a bit, or have to run away from the static now and again. Greg. Despite most things resetting every night, Greg is not one of them. He still remembers me to this day and still calls me his friend. Passing by to say hello is one of the highlights of my night, and I make sure to stick around for a bit of conversation every time. His grasp on language and talking in general has improved, might I add. I guess it was just a matter of talking more often, and exercising that vital part of himself that he's been deprived of in solitary confinement. He still breaks free every now and again, but now it's because he wants to spend more time with me. Unfortunately, I have to call the nurses to contain him. Otherwise, the guard will find him, and that's much worse, trust me. I also found out that Greg has a sweet tooth, so I sneak in snacks to give to him. I'm sure that's not allowed, but no one said anything to me yet. The guard. There's not much to say about it. The guard is still the same. I haven't had to go up against him again, but I did try a few things. I tried bringing in a small pistol that I could conceal in my clothes, to shoot the guard with and see what would happen. It jammed 3 nights in a row. but shot just fine outside the asylum. I tried calling the guard on the other anomalies, like the nurses or the static, in case one of the anomalies is covered by the rules. He doesn't answer me. I tried stockpiling cookies from Martha and using their effects to aid me in fighting the guard in hand-to-hand combat. If my name is written in the logbook, he doesn't fight back, just quips at me the whole time with remarks such as, "You're getting better, chap. At this rate, you'll be stealing my job." If my name isn't written down, and yes, I've tried that, insane as it might be, he does fight back, and oh boy does he fight back. We once thrashed the whole reception area before I'd run away, but I didn't put as much as a scratch on him. I'm pretty sure he's indestructible. Martha and her cookies. Talking to Martha, I still see her every so often. I've mostly taken chocolate chip cookies from her tray whenever she has it, just like the rules instruct. There's usually one or two on the tray with the rest being raisins. They're mighty delicious. But out of curiosity, I did take raisin cookies as well. She gave me a sly grin and walked away. I crumpled up the cookies and ate the smallest crumb, thinking that they were poisoned. I never imagined anything about her cookies, save for the fact that it's a test. Martha hates raisins and people that like raisins. It turns out that the raisin cookies are injected with stuff from the nurse's room, which means that yeah, Martha sneaks in and out of the basement to steal from the nurses. She's one hardcore granny, but she can't read the labels, so she ends up putting random stuff in the cookies. Bad effects this far include nausea, bleeding from various orifices for random amounts of time, explosive diarrhea, sprouting random body parts that shrivel up and fall off, losing some or all of my senses, and many more. They're never lethal, but I'm not sure if that's because of the small dose. Some of the benefiting effects this far include increased strength and agility, sharper senses, invisibility, rapid healing, and many more. These are the cookies I stockpiled to fight the guard with. And no, I can't use them to become a superhero or save myself from pinches again. I ate all of them in one go, and seeing me in action, the nurses figured it out. They've since somehow barred Martha from reaching the good stuff, but they still let her get the bad stuff just to mess with me. I figured that one out the hard way. The nurses. They might just be the most interesting thing in this asylum, since I didn't imagine much about them, like where they come from or where they go once they're done. Anna went in and filled those blanks for me. The nurses reside in their den in the basement when they're not needed. They always come up via the elevator. I don't know how many of them there are, but I'm guessing somewhere in the vicinity of 50, plus or minus a few because they sometimes die. Not all nurses are made equal, it seems. Depending on their assigned patients or their expected duties, they can be slightly above average or insanely strong. Greg always has 3 active nurses, because he sometimes does manage to kill them. His nurses are by far the strongest and the ones that I call most often. I've since given them nicknames. Darling is the nurse that answered my first Greg call. She's the most chatty out of the 3, always down to throw quibs. She's also the strongest. Beatrice is the second Greg nurse, and she's the quiet type. I don't think I've ever heard her talk, actually. She's also the hardest to escape, with her get stuff done fast and efficient attitude. And lastly, there's Charlotte, the only nurse I've seen being made into one. I tried talking to her when she came up once, but she doesn't remember her past or even her name. She's just another nurse now, and yes, I feel very bad about it every time I think of her. I've since found her disappearance case, though it never garnered much media attention outside of the immediate town where she lived. I try my best to keep any nurse from dying. I don't want another one on my already heavy conscience. The other patients. Aside from Greg and Martha, there are plenty of patients in the building. I never counted them all, but my guess is somewhere in the hundreds given the asylum size. Most of them seem like normal people, but there are a select few bad eggs among them. They'll try to chat me up when I pass the rooms, and their words are like anglerfish lures. Once you take the bait, you're done for. You won't be able to stop yourself from talking. They'll ask more and more personal questions, and you'll answer truthfully, no matter how hard you'll want not to. Once they know you well enough, they'll offer you a trade. Receive your greatest desire for the low price of switching places with them once you're done. How do I know this? Because despite my knowledge of the rules and my better judgment, I accidentally answered a patient once. My only saving grace was that my deepest desire was to get away from the asylum for good, which couldn't happen if I switched places with them. I was saved by a paradox. Field tests. My first night was one, and I've had plenty since. Anna usually gives me a heads up at the end of my shift, along with an address I need to reach by the next night. Once on location, I have to pretend to be a veteran employee on the way out, and teach the unlucky new guy or gal how to survive. There's no rhyme or reason to which sets of rules I'll have to field test, so my best guess is that they're picked at random. But these tests have opened my eyes to the fact that other people will have to live by the rules that I write. I've since been trying to make them as mellow as possible, while still having them pass. Otherwise, other writers might write worse rules and doom more people. It's one of the few things that keep me going, along with Greg and my fear of Anna, who I'm pretty sure is one of Satan's daughters. Anna. My interactions with her have been limited for obvious reasons. I've always been careful around her after that first night, so I haven't had to witness another one of her outbursts. But her small remarks and the way she sometimes words things have convinced me that she's not of this world, but some spawn from the depths of hell sent up here to cause suffering. For example, a few days ago, I approached her to voice one of my concerns about the job, something that a user here mentioned in the comments of the first post that I made. "Oh, come in, Mr. Mark," she said when I knocked on her door. "You need anything?" "Yes, Anna," I said, not going further than the threshold of her office. "You see, I love my job and the money that it earns me." I lied through my teeth. "But I'm worried about the IRS since I didn't sign an actual contract, and you're paying me under the table." A look of realization crossed her features. She face-palmed in over-the-top manner while laughing. "I knew we forgot something," she said. "You'll have to excuse me. The IRS and work contracts aren't a thing where I come from." With another wave of her hand that produced hellish flames and smoke, she summoned a contract just ripe for signing, which I did sign, and she gave me a grin full of needle-sharp teeth. She scares the crap out of me, okay? "There," she said before the ink had a chance to dry. "That should set your mind at ease. Don't worry, there are no strange clauses in that contract, and I'll go ahead and retroactively report your income if that's okay with you. Just be sure to file your taxes as soon as possible," she said in the same cheery voice that I had grown used to, with a tad of teasing thrown into the mix. So yeah, that's what I've been doing between work and writing this post in the past few days. Getting my taxes done, because I can't afford to go to jail. I have a sneaking suspicion that any potential jail room I'll be thrown into will have a list of rules under the mattress, and it won't be one written by me. Thank you to everyone who tried to help me in the comments, but I'm afraid I'm here for the long run. And if you ever find a list of rules when you get a new job, move to a new apartment, or are otherwise in a new, scary location, I'm truly sorry.